Good morning. The April 27th, 2022 meeting of Haliburton County Council is now in session. Warden Liz Danielson presiding.
Good morning, everyone. Just a couple of items. We've got two fairly long items on the agenda, being the public meeting and the draft shoreline preservation bylaw. So we may do a little bit of a shuffle on the agenda and go through the agenda with the exception of planning. We'll save that section until after we finish the public meeting so we don't break up our discussion. And I will have some comments to make on the draft shoreline bylaw, but I'll save them until we get to that point on the agenda. So if you could take a roll call, please, Mr. Rutter.
Warden Danielson.
Present.
Councillor Moffat.
Present.
Councillor Roberts.
Present.
Councillor Kennedy.
Present.
Councillor Burton.
Present.
Councillor Ryle.
Present.
Councillor DeVolen.
Present.
And Councillor Shell.
Present.
Thank you.
We respectfully acknowledge that the County of Haliburton is located in Treaty 20 Mishi-Saugig territory and in the traditional territory of the Mishi-Saugig and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations. We acknowledge a shared presence of Indigenous nations throughout the area and recognize its original Indigenous inhabitants as the stewards of its lands and waters since time immemorial. I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the agenda. Moved by Councillor Burton, seconded by Councillor Kennedy.
Moved by Councillor Burton, seconded by Councillor Kennedy. Be it resolved that the April 27th, 2022 Haliburton County Council agenda be approved.
All in favor? That's carried. Is there any notice of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof today? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the minutes of March 23rd, both special meeting and regular? Councillors Roberts and Shell.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Shell. Be it resolved that the minutes from the March 9th special meeting and the March 23rd, 2022 regular meeting of Haliburton County Council be adopted as circulated.
All in favor? That's carried. No business arising from the previous meeting and no delegations. So we will move down to approval and reports and recommendations from the Committee of the Whole. Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the recommendations? Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Moffat.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that the recommendations from the April 13th, 2022 meeting of the Haliburton County Committee of the Whole be adopted by Haliburton County Council.
All in favor? That's carried. Nothing on joint accessibility. So we will move to the administrative reports. First being the correspondence listing. Any comments or desire to support any of the letters of correspondence? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder then to receive the correspondence listing? Councillors Burton and Moffat.
Moved by Councillor Burton, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that the correspondence listing for the period of February 2nd, 2022 to April 19th, 2022 be received for information by Haliburton County Council.
All in favor? That's carried. We'll bring in Chief Waite and hear about the ambulance service review report.
Perhaps, oh, there he is.
My computer was playing tricks this morning.
Good morning, Chief Waite.
Good morning, Warden, members of council.
You want to tell us about your service review?
Yeah. We have every 3 years, we have to go through our service review, and that was a little bit different this round in that they didn't come on site. So that's why this is called the preliminary report. They will come on site at some future date. I'm really not sure when that will be. It could maybe never happen, and just the next time we have our service review in 2024, it may happen. But the end result of our service review, I think, was excellent. They used to call them recommendations. Now they list them as observations or an opportunity for improvement. We were given the basically the checklist that we had to complete at the end of July, and we had to have all the documentation submitted by end of September, which we did. And then they review it, and then we had an exit interview in around November, which was one of the shorter exit interviews I've ever had. I don't think it lasted more than 5 minutes, because as you'll note on page 30 is the single observation that was made in the review, and that was based on opportunities for improvement. Being in 2019, we slightly missed our target for sudden cardiac arrests, and then 2020, we slightly missed our targets response times for CTAS 1 and 2. But you'll see in my response letter, which is the very last page, that the different things we do to try and mitigate us missing those response times, which has included upstaffing Torrey Hills. So in 2021, we did meet all of our response times. So that observation has been addressed and corrected. And that was, as long as there's no other if you have any other questions regarding the review, it's a fairly lengthy thing to read, but all in all, a very successful review.
Well done to you and your team. Do members of council have any questions about the report? Councillor Kennedy.
Just want to congratulate you, Chief Wade, and your staff for the excellent job. I know what these things are like. I've been through a number of them myself. They're very stressful times, and it's actually great that you've got the report in here. It allows the public to see what kind of scrutiny and what kind of standards we're held to. As far as the response time on sudden cardiac arrest, that's so dependent on where those actually occur. It takes 3 minutes to get downtown, and it takes 45 minutes to get to Conesus Lake, which throws off the numbers immensely. So again, your team's to be commended for the efforts you're making to comply to those. So thank you very much on behalf of everybody.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report, please? Councillors Moffat and Ryle.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives the April 27th, 2022 staff report on the 2021 Haliburton County Paramedic Service Review Preliminary Report for information purposes only.
All in favor? That's carried. Are we bringing in our Director of Corporate Services, or just going to go through these reports?
You can bring her in.
Okay.
She studies, for hours to present these reports. We might as well make sure that's not wasted effort.
Okay. Good morning, Andrea.
Good morning.
So first up are your year-to-date actuals.
Yes, so as of March 31st, 19.36% of operating expenses have been incurred and 3.12% of our capital expenses have been incurred. As of the end of March, we should be approximately 25% spent.
Are there any questions on this report? Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive it? Councillors DeVolen and Moffat.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the staff report on the year-to-date actuals as at March 31st, 2022, and further that the year-to-date actuals as at March 31st, 2022 be hereby approved.
All in favor? That's carried. Next are your year-end reserve allocations.
Yes, as we get closer to the end of our 2021 audit, we're now able to provide you our recommended year-end reserve transfers. These recommended transfers to reserves are due to unspent 2021 budget amounts. There is one transfer from reserve recommended within my report, and this is to fund the overage of the LiDAR project. As the audit is not 100% finalized, there may still be a minor year-end adjustment to close the year. However, this is expected to be the bulk of it. This will leave the 2021 year-end reserve balance, excluding Safe Restart and modernization funding, at $6,709,443.20. This is a total increase of just over 1.8 million from 2020. And we are anticipating the auditor to attend hopefully the May council meeting to present the 2021 financial statements.
Okay, that's great. Are there any questions on the allocations as they stand at the moment? Could I have a mover and a seconder then to approve the report? Councillors Shell and Roberts.
Moved by Councillor Shell, seconded by Councillor Roberts. Be it resolved that the Haliburton County Council receives for information the staff report on the 2021 year-end reserve allocations and approves the transfers to and from reserves as documented in the report.
All in favor? That's carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is some suggestions for billboard advertising for physician recruitment. I believe that our recruiter is not available this morning, so we'll hear a brief report from Mr. Rudder.
The good news is she's not here because she's hosting a physician, so a potential recruit. So for a great reason, her absence is for a great reason. Council will recall that in the past we have utilized some billboards to advertise for physicians with I would say mixed results and mixed reviews. Wendy has actually worked with a local marketing firm who have suggested a couple different billboards, and those are attached to the report. She has reviewed those actually with representatives of the family health team, some of the same individuals who had provided feedback in the past that wasn't so positive to the billboards that were out there. And she received really, really positive feedback. They really feel that they could make a difference and would be effective. We've identified a few places. We've certainly identified the spots, but we do have to work with the property owners either near or the road authorities to make sure that those are acceptable spots for everyone involved. And I've outlined the potential financial considerations in the report. So unless there are any questions, or I'll do my best to answer questions if you have them, but that's the report.
Councillor Roberts and then Councillor DeVolen.
Okay, so yeah, no, I think this is a great idea, and I like the billboards. I think they're classy and will be eye-catching. Just to double check, in the municipality of Dysart, we do have a signed bylaw, and I don't know every detail of it, but I just want to be sure that it also, any ones that are being placed in Dysart also meet Dysart signed bylaws. So just double check on that. And if not, we'll figure that out. Also, the 4 locations, it says County Road 21 leading into the village of Haliburton. So I sort of know where that is. I would say on the way to Tim Hortons-ish area. But the last bullet says County Road 21 leading into the village of Minden. Is it County Road 121 or County Road 21? Just to be sure.
21, I believe. It's right near the campground and the.
So just curious with the vehicle count then, I guess, because I thought, well, maybe they mean 121, because the vehicle count on 21 is 10,000 vehicles a day at that Dysart end, and only 3,000 to 4,000 vehicles on the Minden end. So I thought maybe it meant a different county road. That's why.
Yeah, I don't believe it is. I mean, I could confirm the road counts, but I believe it is. And to your first question, right in the resolution, it says that directing staff to work with the appropriate road authorities. So that would be dealing with the sign bylaws in other communities.
Because I suspect you're not the only ones with the sign bylaw. Councillor DeVolen.
Yeah, I'm along the same lines. My comment is Councillor Robertson, I'm less concerned about our municipal sign bylaws that we can do that. Although, just a cautionary tale, anytime dealing with signage on MTO and Highway 35, if this comes much later than any of these other initiatives, do not be surprised. I think the last time I think of the Halliburton County signs, and I don't know how long that saga went on, years, that we'll pray and hope that that's not the case in this circumstance.
Councillor Kennedy.
Yeah, I like the idea. Two questions. Do you anticipate if this is successful, these will be a seasonal base? I see that these are both water-based. I'm just wondering, in the winter, do we do downhill skiing or something along that theme, or if we're just going to use the same theme year round? And have we any idea on how to measure the impact and success or failure of the program of going forward with it? Is there any kind of metrics there?
To answer your first question, I think that's something we can consider. I don't think we had considered it, but that's a really good idea. So I'll take that back to Wendy. With respect to the second, I know that she often talks to physicians that contact her and says, how did you find out about us? And so that's really one of the first questions they ask. So just because of the low volume of calls, I think it would be a pretty easy thing to track. But yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Could I have a mover and a seconder then to move forward with this endeavor? Councillors DeVolen and Kennedy.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Kennedy. Be it resolved that Halliburton County Council received the April 27th, 2022 staff report on billboard advertising for physician recruitment, and that Halliburton County Council approve the purchase of the billboards based on the creatives attached to the staff report, with the funds transferred from the physician recruitment reserve. Further, that staff be directed to work with the appropriate road authorities and/or property owners to acquire acceptable sites for installation. And finally, that relief be granted from the moratorium on new billboard signage if the preferred locations are along county roads.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank Wendy for her work on that. And it's excellent to hear that the doctors don't think that the billboards make us look desperate.
She specifically asked them that question.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, next on the agenda is the clarification of the rent supplement calculation that we spoke to previously. So Mike, you want to update us on that?
Sure. So first of all, I apologize for not having this information when it was presented. But really, you can see in the report that they really take an upset limit, which is the average market rent for the unit, deduct the anticipated portion of rent that the household would pay according to their income, and that's a best estimate. And then the balance would become the rent supplement cost. That is indexed to inflation to reflect an annual permitted rent control guideline increase. And so you can see down below how the calculation was, or how the final number was arrived at. So I hopefully provide some clarification on how the rent supplement is calculated.
Any questions or further clarification required? Okay, could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Councillors Roberts and Burton, thank you.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Burton. Be it resolved that Halliburton County Council received the April 27th, 2022 clarification of rent supplement calculation, Hot Pond Enterprises Corporation, for information purposes.
All in favor? That's carried. And the next report is on the delegation of authority to the CAO during lame duck periods. Mr. Rutter.
Thank you. So we are in election season, and the announcements are rolling out like crazy. So it appears that we will be in lame duck. There are two lame duck periods where there are restricted acts. The first one begins on August 19th, which is nomination day, when all the nominations have to be filed, and then would go to the day of the election. on October 24th. And then the second lame duck period goes from October 24th to November 15th, when the new council would take office. Basically, you need to be certain, or you need to be certain that at least 75% of your council has the potential to return. So basically, everyone would at least 75% in our case would need to be running for council. So it does, based on the announcements so far, it doesn't appear that's the case. And so if council goes into lame duck, the acts that you're prohibited from doing during those periods are the appointment or removal from office of any officer of the municipality, the hiring or dismissal of any employee, the disposition of any real or personal property which has a value exceeding $50,000 at the time of disposal, or making any expenditure or any other liability which exceeds $50,000. Though that would be if it was not included in the budget that has been passed. I know I can only speak for the last election. In the last election, council delegated that authority to the CAO. I'm actually not aware of anywhere across the province that there has been an abuse of that authority during the lame duck period, but certainly we didn't experience that here in the last election. But it does allow council or the corporation to carry on business in the event something unforeseen happens. So the recommendation from staff is that we bring forward a bylaw at the next meeting, delegating those prohibited acts to the CAO during the lame duck period or periods.
Any questions or concerns, comments? Councillor DeVolen.
No concerns, just a comment. This is a great bit of legislation so that incumbent councillors on their way out the door don't do something bizarre. And it's a safeguard, and not only at the county, but yeah, I've never heard of it being abused anywhere. And it's just a really, really good piece of legislation. And I trust our CAO as far as I trust any of the rest of you. So I think it's a great move.
Thank you for those comments.
Not sure how to take them.
We trust you, Mike. Maybe I should wait until after we pass the resolution before I say that. Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report and recommendation? Councillor DeVolen and Ryle.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received the April 27th, 2022 staff report on the delegation of authority to the CAO during lame duck periods, and that staff be directed to present a bylaw for council's consideration delegating certain acts should council be declared lame duck between nomination day and election day, or between election day and the end of the term of office.
All in favor? That's carried. Okay, now we have a report on the updates to the procedural bylaw, primarily to manage the dates associated with the election and the lower tier inaugural meetings, with some, I think there's a few housekeeping corrections on there. Are there any, maybe I should let Mr. Rutter speak before I ask if there's any questions.
We also made some changes with respect to the virtual meetings and how those would be undertaken. And I've tried to incorporate the direction that I received at the last committee of the whole meeting. But I would be interested if I have missed anything or misunderstood anything. That is really later on in the bylaw. Sorry, I'm moving through it. We've talked about how the chair of each committee will reserve the right to hold meetings virtually or in person. If they are held virtually, we do have an obligation to be open and transparent in our decision making, so those meetings would have to be broadcast on our YouTube channel. We've added economic development mainly as a housekeeping to the tourism department. And then we've tried to be clear that during a declared state of emergency, if council aren't able to meet, meetings will be held virtually and broadcasts of the meeting will be posted on the county YouTube channel. And there are a couple, other sections dealing specifically with meeting during an emergency. And then rather than electronic participation being connected to a declaration, we have just made that, a broader, I guess, use of electronic meetings. We are requiring that at least 4 members will be required, or at least a quorum will be required to be in person if it is an in-person meeting. And then the others would have to talk to the warden at least 24 hours prior to the meeting to let them know that they would like to participate virtually. And then I guess the only other, I changed a word. It's the one in Article 49, the old 49, new 52. In the event the clerk, it said believes that the electronic participation. I think we should say determines that electronic participation by the public can be facilitated. Just strengthen that a little. Yeah, so as I say, I think we've incorporated the changes, but if I have missed anything, our procedural bylaw requires us to give at least a 1-month notice of this. So really, you're not passing the bylaw today. You're recommending that the bylaw be brought back 1 month from now for consideration.
In the form that you presented.
Yeah.
Councillor Kennedy, sorry.
Yeah, just, are we right now in a declared state of emergency? I don't think we are we? No.
No.
So under this, we wouldn't be allowed then to do this meeting today? Like, we've got an electronic meeting here. We're not in a declared state of emergency, yet we're meeting virtually. And just clarification on that if possible. That's, I know we're doing it because of health unit reasons, but it's sort of, I think I'm missing something here.
No, I think it does provide that though. I apologize, I can't find the exact, but I think if it's in a declared state of emergency, or if there are 3 provisions or health unit recommendations, or but I apologize, I'm struggling to find it right now.
If I may, I have it.
Okay.
Under permanent, that's permanent standing committees of council, sorry. But it does say the chair will reserve the right to determine if committee meetings are held virtually or in person. Sorry, I thought that was council meetings.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at item 34. It just says, if during a declared state of emergency, council are not able to meet in person, meetings will be held virtually, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't say anything about meeting virtually when we're not in a state of emergency. Other than the three times a year.
Yeah, if you go into Article 39 or the new 39,
okay.
37, it says, well, every effort shall be made by members of council to attend meetings in person. Attendance via electronic means shall be permitted in the following circumstances: during a declared state of emergency, a natural weather event, health and safety reasons, including a pandemic, restrictions or guidelines as set out by the province of Ontario or the local health unit. I think that would give you the authority to meet virtually for those reasons.
Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. I wasn't at the committee of the whole, so didn't have benefit of any discussion around this, but in section 39, the last point that Mike just talked about, restrictions or guidelines, point 3, health and safety reasons, including a pandemic, and 4, restrictions and guidelines as set out by the health unit. Right now, they're like, they don't really recommend. They did during the pandemic. It was you can't meet. So who decides if there are guidelines? Like, restrictions and guidelines are different things. So is that just nickel and diming? Is that being too concerned about the words? Or if there are guidelines where the health unit might say, "Ooh, we recommend you might not meet in person," who makes that decision? I guess is what I'm looking for.
Go ahead, Mike.
Council. We would. I think what we've done up to now is whenever we've had the conversation about whether we should meet in person or whether we should meet, we've always brought that forward to council, and council has made that decision.
Councillor Rail.
In the event that we're still meeting in person, which is fine, if a councillor tests positive for COVID, now what do we do?
Go ahead, Mike.
I think you would advise the warden that you're not able to participate in person, and we would be able to have a hybrid meeting where some participate virtually and some are in the room. I think we have provisions that would permit that.
Any other questions or concerns? Okay, could I have a mover and a seconder then to receive the report? And we'll bring the bylaw back at the next meeting. Councillors Kennedy and Moffat.
Moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received the April 27th, 2022 procedural bylaw updates staff report, and that Haliburton County Council approve the draft as presented or amended, and direct that the bylaw be presented at the next council meeting.
All in favor? That's carried. Okay, it is now time to move into our public meeting portion of today's meeting. So I will call the meeting to order. It is 9:31. This is a public meeting held by council under Section 51 of the Planning Act. This public meeting is declared open to consider a proposed plan of subdivision condominium on vacant land. And I would ask the planner to present himself and give us his report and description of the application. Good morning, Mr. Stone.
Good morning, Warden and members of council. Thank you for having me attend your session. With regards to the Planning Act application for draft plan of subdivision condominium, the file number is 46T 22001 Granite Shores. It is a draft plan of subdivision condominium, and it will be a vacant land condominium as it's proposed now. So I provided you a staff report that which gives a general overview of the application, its background, and it's recommended that council receive this report and then host the public meeting to allow for the agent to present the details around the proposal, as well as allow the public to provide their thoughts on the application, and for council to receive that information, and also, if they would like, ask either the public or the agent questions in regards to the proposal. As it relates to my analysis, you can see in the report that there is none. I will, at the direction of council, prepare a detailed analysis on the merits of the project at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you. We can see that notice has been given in accordance with the requirements. I guess we would move into asking if the applicant or agent want to make any comments, and I see they're on a list here to present to us.
So bear with us, Warden. We'll bring in people as quickly as we can.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Michael, would you please put the presentation up on the screen?
Just bear with us one moment. There we are.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Julia Redfern, a planner from IBI Group, the planning consultant respecting a cottage and resort development proposal in the municipality of Highlands East. Today, I will be providing you with an overview of the planning application and the details of the proposed development. Next slide. Our client owns lands east adjacent to a Crown Reserve abutting Center Lake in the municipality of Highlands East. The subject lands highlighted in red have a lot area of 433 hectares and lot frontage of 1,337 meters along County Road 118. Currently, the subject lands are unoccupied and consist of a forest and scattered wetlands. There is a township road allowance and a Crown Reserve located between Center Lake and the subject lands, shown with the dashed line, where public recreation is permitted. The primary access point to the lake is from the southwest boat launch on the west side. Next slide. In terms of greater surrounding context, the subject lands are located approximately 2.5 kilometers northwest of the Cardiff hamlet, within an area mostly undeveloped, characterized by a mix of wooded areas, small lakes, wetlands, and rocky outcrops. The majority of existing development in the surrounding area includes recreational and seasonal cottages along the shoreline of other lakes. Next slide. The owner is proposing to develop a portion of the subject lands with 28 new seasonal cottage lots, a tourist commercial resort comprising 60 suites and a one-story wellness center, 4 private open space blocks, a public hiking trail, and a highway commercial block. The remaining 317 hectares of land is proposed to remain unchanged for now, with the long-term intent of the lands being utilized as a maple tree farm. The current proposal before you does not include the Crown Reserve, but it should be noted that concurrent planning applications are being pursued to acquire the Crown Reserve to facilitate waterfront lots. Next slide. Specifically, a Crown Land Disposition Request and a Crown Land Use Policy Atlas Amendment were submitted to the Ministry back in February 2020. These applications are still being processed as the Ministry awaits feedback from the County of Haliburton and Indigenous communities. Today, we are here to discuss the vacant land plan of condominium application. We are also pursuing a zoning bylaw amendment with the municipality of Highlands East, but future discussions with staff are planned before they begin processing the application. Next slide. So the 200-foot or 60-meter wide strip of Crown land along the shores of Center Lake are fronting lands granted under the Mining Act. Where a mining claim includes land covered with water or bordering on water, the surface rights over a width of up to 120 meters from the high water mark may be reserved for the Crown to avoid environmental damage from mining activities, thereby allowing the lands to be used by the public for recreation and leisure activities. Our client has purchased the mineral rights along the east side of Center Lake from the commodity company Glencore and transferred them back to the Crown in order to avoid mining activities that could cause severe environmental damage, as this is the main purpose of why the surface rights were initially reserved for the Crown. If the ministry applications are successful, this would facilitate direct access to the Center Lake shoreline. If they are not, we would proceed with the development plan before you today. Next slide. So here's an excerpt of Schedule A land use from the county's official plan. Subject lands are designated rural land, which is intended to encourage the establishment of diversified tourism opportunities that are ecologically sustainable. Next slide. Here's an excerpt of Schedule A land use from the municipality's official plan. The subject lands are designated rural and shoreline, which permit local and tourist commercial uses and recreation-based tourist commercial uses that are compatible with surrounding uses. Next slide. So as mentioned, the application before you is the vacant land plan of condominium. It is an application to create the lots. In this type of condo corp, buildings do not need to be constructed before the condominium is registered. The plan provides unit descriptions, which may just be the vacated lot, similar to on a plan of subdivision. It would also provide development size, construction design standards, maintenance requirements, roadways, and common element components. In this plan, we have 28 cottage lots, 1 block for the Resort and Wellness Center, 4 private open space blocks, a common element road, and a highway commercial block. 2 of the private open space blocks are proposed to have access easements that would allow the public to safely access the Crown Reserve and thereby Center Lake. An internal public hiking trail is also proposed. The proposed development is not prohibiting the public from accessing Center Lake, rather improving public access by providing a new road and parking areas. Next slide. So a broad range of technical studies were completed in support of the plan of condo application, including an EIS, a hydro-G study and site servicing plan, terrain analysis, lake capacity assessment, swim brief, traffic brief, stage 1 and 2 archaeological assessments, and a planning justification report. Overall, it has been confirmed through these studies that the development is feasible from a technical perspective. Next slide. Thus far, we have received a handful of public comments we plan to address through a comprehensive application resubmission. Some of them include concerns respecting destruction of the natural environment, overall scale, and adverse human health impacts that could result from radon gas. Next slide. Firstly, an EIS was completed by Palmer Environmental Consulting Group to characterize the existing natural environmental conditions and identify environmental constraints, opportunities, and potential impacts of the development on the natural environment. The site design was determined with input from Palmer based on these environmental constraints and opportunities. Essentially, they identified and delineated locally significant wetlands, confirmed potential species at risk habitats, significant wildlife habitats, and type 1 and 2 fish habitats. The report concluded that the proposed development is environmentally feasible, provided that the recommended mitigation and protection measures are implemented. Some of these mitigation measures include 30-meter development setbacks from identified wetlands, development timing based on seasonal cycles, and vegetating disturbed areas with native trees, shrubs, or grasses. With respect to topography, Palmer found that the existing gentle nature of the slopes are conducive for development. Next slide. We also received concerns about the development being too large. A lake capacity assessment was prepared, which confirmed that an additional 121 seasonal extended lots could be accommodated on Center Lake from a biophysical perspective. Although a recreational carrying capacity study was not required as part of the complete application, Highlands East Council may use zoning regulations or provisions in a site plan or development agreement to mitigate impacts related to the recreational use of lakes. Currently, there are no docks or boathouses proposed or permitted along the shoreline, as our client does not own the Crown Reserve. Also, the Condominium Corporation may provide further restrictions to limit recreational use of the lake, such as prohibiting people from having a boat with a motor greater than a specified horsepower. Next slide. Lastly, radon gas exposure and associated adverse human health impacts was brought up as a concern due to the proximity to Auger Lake, where elevated levels of radium concentration are present due to the mining industry history of the area. Groundwater samples were collected from the subject land. The test well closest to the former Bycroft mine indicated that concentration for uranium was well below the Ontario drinking water quality standards. Further, sediment samples were collected by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission in 2019 as part of an independent environmental monitoring program for Dino, Madawaska, and Bycroft decommissioned mine sites, finding radium concentrations below the screening levels for areas outside of the mine infrastructure. Moreover, the health unit recommended that foundations be constructed to include radon mitigation, as it is understood that naturally high levels of uranium are known to occur in the local bedrock. A clause may also be included in the purchase and sale agreement to make buyers aware of the radium concentrations at Tow Drain Auger Lake, south of the subject lands. Next slide. So in conclusion, the proposed development and associated plan of condo are consistent with the PPS, conform to the intent of the local official plans, are viable from a technical perspective, are compatible with adjacent land uses, and contribute to diversifying tourism opportunities in the county of Haliburton that are ecologically sustainable. Next slide. In terms of next steps, we are preparing an application resubmission to address all agency and public comments, including those that will be received today. We encourage the public throughout the planning process to provide comments and anticipate a recommendation report to go before council later in the year. Next slide. Thank you for listening. That concludes the presentation. I am here today with Dirk Janis and Aaron Donkers from Palmer Environmental Consulting Group and my colleague John Arians, who are happy to help answer questions that you may have.
Do members of council have any questions of the agents for this application? Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. If the removal of the Crown Reserve is successful, then I presume then docks and boathouses would be allowed?
through you, Chair, that would be considered yes.
And if I may, a follow-up then, there seems to be some concerns around wetlands in there. Is there, water, of course, is under the jurisdiction of the MNR. So what measures would your client be able to undertake, excuse me, to protect those wetlands?
Yes, I will direct that question to Palmer Environmental. They did include recommendations in the report respecting docks as well.
Yes, thank you. It's Dirk Janis with Palmer. Just in response to the wetland question. So as part of our work, we did delineate and map all the wetlands. So that was based on use of background information, but also detailed field surveys. So all of the wetlands that have been identified have been prescribed with buffers and setbacks.
Other questions from council? Two questions, and maybe I missed this in the report, but in line with Councillor Moffat's question, if the Crown Land designation is removed, I'm questioning the corporation's ability to limit the use of motorboats on the lake. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes, so the motorboats can be restricted by the Condominium Corporation, and this has been applied on another project we worked on in the county of Haliburton that Mr. John Arians has experience with, so I will direct that question to him. Thanks.
The chair and to the warden, what Julia is referring to is our Bark Lake application in Highlands East, where through condominium bylaws and regulations that homeowners accept when they purchase units within those complexes, the amount of boating activity can be restricted to certain horsepower of motor. Typically what happens in situations like this is that the common elements include some fleet of boats, maybe 2 jet skis, 2 fishing boats, and 1 water skiing boat that are available for the use of the condominium owners, and they book their time with the various vessels for their use and enjoyment. So there are ways that a private corporation can limit their persons from all of them having boats and motors. And with respect to the earlier question from Councillor Moffat, the removal of the reserve and incorporating the reserve into the development does not necessarily result in boathouses and private docks. That is still a site plan matter. That is still something that the environmental impact study needs to qualify. And it's not a given. It certainly provides the opportunity subject to appropriate controls.
Go ahead, Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. And I can't go back to the presentation that was just on the screen, but if there's the intent to retain, I think it is 3 blocks for public access. I'm aware that this lake is considered a bit of a jewel, and some people know about it, and a lot of people don't. Suddenly becomes very popular, and depending on the access provided in those blocks, the public could bring in the boat. So, I mean, how do you reconcile that, or does it matter?
So through the chair to Councillor Moffat, as part of the site plan process, we are providing public access in those 3 locations. Whether we include a boat ramp with that public access or not is totally at the discretion of the county and the municipality. So the ability to launch kayaks and canoes and small fishing boats probably wouldn't be an issue without a ramp. But any larger vessels, and for ski purposes and so on and so forth, would require that type of ramp, which is just not available. So we can simply prevent that type of activity by not allowing a boat ramp.
Thank you.
Just back to my question, but I was glad to hear the clarification that it was limiting the use of the condominium owners. But I know that there is already a bit of a natural ramp for smaller boats. So you're not limiting the use of smaller boats by the public.
So to you, Warden, the existing boat ramp or the existing public access of 118 is down a very steep grade that driveway is extremely eroded and rutted, and there are rock outcroppings there. I mean, I've stood there several times, and it would be extremely difficult to get a boat and trailer and to actually launch a boat from a trailer at that location, other than, you know, a small fishing boat or canoes and kayaks. So I think we can control public use of that lake with large motor vessels.
Yeah, I definitely understand the need to reduce the size of boats. It's a small lake. I'm just, my other question kind of ties in with this. I'm aware that there are several, or have been several Crown land leases on the in that area, and I just wanted to make sure, or see if the land mass that you're dealing with includes that, the island at the end of the lake where there has been a lease.
My understanding is that the island at the north end of the lake is included. It's part of the ownership group, and the plan of condominium proposes 2 vacant lots upon the island that will only be boat accessible. So, you know, those 2 lots will require boat access only. Of course, in the winter, snowmobile access once the lake is frozen.
Okay, thank you. Councillor DeVolen, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted point of clarification, having been summer and winter to this body of water that there exists off the side of the highway, public access, be it less than ideal, but in terms of what is or is not, there is already unfettered access to the lake, correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Devlin, the access from 118 is available. It is quite steep. It is challenging. And from a sightline perspective, when you're driving out of that access and you're trying to get back onto 118, the sight lines in either direction are not the greatest. So by adding an access from this development to the lake, number one, it's going to be more accessible. Number two, it's going to be safer from a transportation standpoint as well, sir.
Challenging though it might be, the access off 118 continues to be used.
That's correct.
On a fairly regular basis. Are there other questions of the agents? Okay. Does anyone wish to speak? Anyone outside of the agent or applicant wish to speak to the proposed plan of subdivision or condominium? If so, please identify yourself. And I know that we have a number of people, so we'll bring them in one at a time.
And Mike will move as quickly as he possibly can to bring them in and out, but we apologize for the delays here.
And the agents may wish to stay on screen in case there needs to be clarification or responses to submissions.
So I think we've brought in Mr. Reed.
So Mr. Reed, if you could identify yourself and make your comments.
Good morning, thank you. Center Lake drains into Potash Lake where our Highlands East cottage is located. Granite Shores and Highland View have applied to purchase a 200-foot Crown Reserve that now allows public access to the Center Lake shoreline. Granite Shores has said it does not need the Crown Reserve to proceed and has offered 3 public access points through their private resort. Highland View's draft development plan for the west side of the lake shows similar limited access. The 2 developments would take up most of the lake shoreline. Privately owned public access points can be closed. There is no public parkland dedication offered for the Granite Shores access points or for any other part of the resort. Access to the resort from Highway 118 is proposed to be a private road. Loss of the Crown Reserve on both sides of the lake, allowing lake access only through private property and restricting access to the resort to only a private road, plus any sale of the 66-foot shoreline road allowance by Highland East would then make access to Center Lake privately controlled. Nowhere does the provincial policy statement say that providing opportunities for sustainable and diversified tourism should be provided by converting a public access lake to private access. Granite Shores proposes to be a seasonal cottage and tourist commercial resort development. Section 3.3.3 of the Highlands East official plan advises that any zoning bylaw would not differentiate between seasonal and permanent use, and seasonal use has to conform to the requirements for permanent residential use. Granite Shores demands on everything from road access and landfill capacity to emergency services will also be year-round. The application of the county should define, the applicant and the county should define how they will meet the year-round demand for these services. Including the 30 cottage lots documented in the various peer reviews, plus the 60 condo units for Granite Shores and the 37 cottage lots contemplated by Highland View Properties for the west side of the lake, it would be 120 to 127 residential units planned on the lake, plus the spa. This would be more than twice the lake's 55-unit recreational carrying capacity calculation in section 2.3.9 of the Highlands East official plan. The proposed highway commercial block also identifies a possible marina and restaurant that would further add demands on the lake. There are 2 dams controlling the flow from Center Lake. If Center Lake receives more lake activity from the Granite Shores resort and the cottages, there is a likelihood that lake access to the dams and to the uranium mine tailings pond below one of them will increase. There is very little site access control for both dams, and particularly to the smaller dam that holds back sediment from entering Potash Lake. Unlike Center Lake, Potash hosts a healthy lake trout population. Our lake's property owners would appreciate the county or Highlands East conducting baseline water quality monitoring of the flows out of Center Lake to be able to determine any future changes to the water quality. It would also be appreciated if the county would reach out to the owners of the dams to ask for a report on their condition and a reduction in the ease of access to prevent possible tampering with the stop blocks on the smaller dam. So in closing, there are 6 suggestions for next steps for the county, Highlands East, and the developer. Please note that none of these will prevent an economic development opportunity for Center Lake. Number 1, the 200-foot shoreline reserve should be maintained as a Crown Reserve, public access through a public parkland dedication, or a restrictive covenant that runs in perpetuity. As the developer has said, the development opportunity does not depend on buying the reserve, and then it follows that economic benefits also don't depend on the purchase. The number of units in the Granite Shores development should be reduced to match the recreational carrying capacity of the lake. Allowing a higher number will set a higher density precedent for any other county shoreline development applications. Number 3, there should be a financial contribution to support the public amenities and the services required to support any development. Number 4, the land allocation for the proposed public lake access points and the on-site public access trail should be provided as public parkland dedications. The proposed access road to the development should be a public road that is built and maintained to municipal standards. And lastly, the county and the Highlands East are asked to request the owners of the dams controlling the flow from Center Lake to add additional measures to prevent unauthorized access to the dams. Also to conduct water quality measurements to establish a baseline for flows from the lake to allow monitoring of any quality changes. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the application and best wishes for your review. Members of the public would welcome the opportunity to review an amended application at a second public meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reid. Do any members of council have questions of Mr. Reid or require clarification? Okay, once again, thank you, Mr. Reid. We will bring in, I believe, Mr. Mike Thomas is next.
I believe we have Mr. Thomas in the room.
Good morning, Mr. Thomas. You're on mute, so if you're speaking, we cannot hear you.
Good morning. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thank you, Warden, Councilors, staff, for the opportunity to speak here representing the Potash Lake Conservation Association as president. As we've heard already from the applicant as well as Mr. Reed, it's a complicated situation because it involves an application pending on the 200-foot Crown Reserve, as well as the west side of the lake that has not made application at this point, but has also applied for the 200-foot reserve. We have given a substantial and well-researched report last month. I'll leave it to councilors and staff to review that. But this is the beginning of what I call a cottage sprawl. As Muskoka fills and Kawarthas fills, we're going to see more and more of development looking to take land and develop it, which we're not against development, but as our name says, we're a conservation association and cottagers association, and we would like to conserve and not just consume all the developable land around. PLCA does support your Director of Planning's recommendation for another public meeting, because noteworthy, lacking in the public comments so far are those of the Williams Treaties First Nations, whose lands we acknowledge we sit on, and they are the stewards of the lands. So I would like to see their response later. Earlier, we have had response from the public when Granite Shores had a website available. Most of the response there was not supportive. Last June, the response for the 200-foot release of the Crown Reserve was not supportive. And Highlands East, the lower tier municipality, has not supported the release of the Crown Reserve nor this application. And we support that decision of Highlands East. Selfishly, PLCA is concerned about the water that drains from Center Lake through Deer Creek into Potash Lake. And we want to make sure, as Mr. Reed noted, a lot of precautions and monitoring is taken in that area. I just want to refresh what is already in the attachments and why this application currently can't go forward. And as the applicant has already told us, they will have more to do on the next application when it's amended. The MTO is concerned and wants to look at any traffic issues as it relates to both the west side and the east side. Crow Valley Conservation Authority, a flood study is needed to be done. Geotechnical assessment, they're concerned about that. They do not want roads across the wetlands. The health, Halliburton, Kawartha, Pine Ridge Health Unit, concerned about radon mitigation, that is noted by the applicant. The Ministry of Environment, Conservation Parks, they're concerned about setbacks and the species at risk, which we know is a Blanding's turtle, as the applicant knows, but they also discuss the potential of salamander. The third-party reviews that were done, peer reviews, of which there were 4, I believe. I just want to comment that they had one of them on the hydrogeology study had 14 specific concerns. The traffic brief, I noted the concerns that were there by MTO. Stormwater management report, there were 11 concerns there. The report given by the lake capacity assessment has issues, and on the total phosphorus studies. Environmental impact study, the peer review there had 35 concerns and recommendations. In particular, I want to note in one of the peer reviews, it said uranium levels were found to be elevated in groundwater. Additionally, the public often has a fear of radiation that is disproportionate to associated health risk. This has the potential to become an issue in the future unless there is thorough prior characterization and disclosure to future cottage owners, along with recommendations on suitable treatment methods. And the phosphorus impacts are likely to be a key factor in assessing the overall environmental impact of the development on the cold water fishery of Potash Lake downstream. So those are our concerns. We've outlined in our report 7 conclusions. And I just want to note, because we talk about seasonal condominium and the proposed seasonal use of cottages, as we know, the current trend for cottages is for year-round use. That has been heightened during COVID. So the county in Highlands East has to assess this plan as being a permanent residential development requiring year-round municipal, county, and provincial services. So we want to be a partner with county, with the municipality, and with the applicants as we review going forward and have further public input. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Do any members of council have questions of Mr. Thomas? Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. It's just not to Mr. Thomas, but maybe back to the applicant, just in light of the very last thing he said, which is that the year-round use of that. And I didn't know, with it being a condominium, and condominiums can put in restrictions and have different, the board can have different bylaws and guidelines than even the county or the local municipality. Is this intended for year-round use?
Through the chair to Councillor Roberts, it definitely is not. As you're aware, permanent residential development of this scale actually represents creating a new hamlet or a new settlement area, which provincial policies would not allow us to do. So it definitely has to be seasonal development. Having said that, the road may, of course, have to be open all year for fire protection and security purposes. But Mr. and Mrs. Smith coming up for Thanksgiving weekend, or the early March break or something like that, isn't going to create year-round development. It'll primarily be seasonal from May till October.
Go ahead, Councillor Roberts.
So if I may, just would that probably to our director of planning, looking around the screen, ready to go. But I think he's there. Just that, how do we have reassurance that that is the case? And just as you said, Mr. Arians, that those full-time use then become, obviously there's not on a school bus route, all those other things. So I understand people wanting to access a seasonal place in the winter, but how do we prevent somebody from living there and creating essentially a settlement?
Well, as John was alluding to, there's a means to do that through how the corporation is structured. I know, for example, Rocky Crest up on Seguin had a number of condominium units, and what they did is they spelled out how long they could be used for by the individual owners, and then they also included requirements for them to be, shall we use, rented out as well. There's also a means to look at that through the township zoning bylaw as well. So that's something, if it proceeds, we'll have to have those discussions with the township staff. Bear in mind that there will be agreements that have to be entered into between the township and the developer. So we can certainly bring those discussions to bear and make sure they're adequately covered at that time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thomas. Your comments are appreciated. I think next that we have Kevin Murphy who wishes to speak to us.
Actually, Warden Danielson, we have a number of individuals who requested to speak who have not signed on to the meeting. So I believe we are next going to Andrew Martin.
Okay.
Hello.
Good morning, Mr. Martin.
Good morning. How you doing? I can turn that on.
Fine.
How's it going, everybody? Excellent. Thank you for the time today. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, proceed with your comments, please.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation and the time today. I think that I come in as a resident of the Cardiff area and a business owner in the area. I think the presentation is great, and I am, I'm a conflicted individual because I am a big supporter of appropriate development and clever development in the area, because I think that that is progress for our area, and it can do a lot of beneficial things for our township. And I think that I also then have all the concerns that the previous speakers have spoken to, and I guess the purpose in the few minutes I want to take here is just to point out to council a couple of thoughts that I have with regards to the proposal. And so I struggle because I think that there is professionals that are assessing plans and looking at bylaws and all of this sort of thing to make sure that they can check boxes and it can go through. But I feel there's a little bit of dishonesty or manipulation in this proposal. And I say that respectfully, because I think that if the developer wanted to buy that land that did not have water access so they could develop a condominium complex in the middle of the woods, this would be a different discussion. But the reality is they bought property. This approval is contingent on another process of gaining access and approval to Crown Land and to Center Lake, which is quite honestly a very significant part of this community's natural lands. And it's not a small deal. The development itself is called Granite Shores. It wouldn't be a very appropriate name if there was no shores which it could base its development on. And so that in itself, I feel kind of like, there's the idea and the business behind this was really clever, because you could get land at a fraction of the cost that's not on waterfront, then pebble different municipal levels and play them against each other so that nobody really thinks, that you can just sort of worm your way through to getting a really cushy, nice piece of waterfront that you could develop on. And that would be, then the loss of this natural resource, privatization of the shore, and so on and so forth. I think there are significant concerns with the development on the waterfront, but they've already been discussed. So I just want to point out that at some point, one of the challenges of being different levels of politics and having continual open meetings and having different groups of people talking is that at some point, somewhere, some elected officials need to stand up and say, wait a second, this doesn't seem like the ordinary normal way to proceed about something, even though it may check boxes. I also question the idea of the seasonal nature of the development, because my question to you then is, who is policing that? Because I am sure that the development is going to have solid foundation. I'm sure they're going to insulate their pipes, they're going to insulate their properties, and the reality is they're going to have access into the road. So is it going to be in their condominium, restrictions that they cannot access under any circumstances unless fire this property between the months of X and Y? I doubt it. And then when it's built, it's going to just trickle in, and it's not going to matter, because the truth is that we don't have the ability in our township in this area to police such a restriction as seasonal access. So I think my hope is that, in this discussion, and my point is that, we realize what we're doing here is not just taking a piece of this to say, well, we'll let someone else decide about the water and we want to keep it separate. That is the target. Look at the complete project and decide whether you want that complete project in our area. Because if you allow them to go further steps forward, then you're allowing another group of people to decide a few steps. And really what we want to do is we want to get to the platform which we're at, which is the proposed development of a shoreline with docks and boat access and privatization. And if that's what this council wants, then I think that's fair. But I just think that I don't like the way this is happening, which is happening piecemeal by piecemeal, and there's another application here, and so on and so forth. In addition, like the details of the application I'm problematic for. I'm a maple syrup producer in the area, and I represent about a dozen other local maple producers in this area. The maple production that they're proposing is literally going to kill those other businesses, because large-scale maple production, just like we know in Quebec, will devastate small productions. And so let's qualify. A small production might be between 500 taps and 5,000 taps. But when you're proposing development of a maple syrup bush of like in excess of tens of thousands of taps, the process to which you operate that business is scalable at 100%. And so the ability for Quebec producers who have taps in the hundreds of thousands and millions to make maple syrup at a much lower cost then pushes out the market. And so what we get to do in Ontario is say, yes, well, we can't compete with Quebec, but support us because we're local. Having a local producer of that scale is not needed. It's not beneficial to economic development. And I would propose that you're actually going to do more damage to the existing businesses in our local area than you will support them. That being said, I think maple syrup is a huge commodity and a lot of it can be sold. But being honest, you're really not doing any favors to smaller producers that don't have the advantage of a mass development of tens of thousands of trees. Anyway, that's my hope. I hope that we look at the whole project and not piecemeal. This project is about a waterfront development on land that is not owned. And eventually, if we continue to allow the proposal to whittle away at different levels of politics, that's exactly what it's going to be. And so I think I want it to be stated and I want to be aware of that. And I'm sure that many of you are. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Are there any questions for Mr. Martin? Thanks very much for your comments. Is Mr. Reynolds?
I think we have no one left in the waiting room, Warden.
Okay. We also have on the list the township representatives. Do they wish to speak to the application?
I don't believe so. They're monitoring the meeting though.
Okay, just for formality, is there anyone else who wishes to speak to the proposal? And one last time, is there anyone else who wishes to speak to the proposal, either for or against?
Madam Warden, I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to respond to some of the concerns that were raised.
If you wish, this might be the best time to do that.
Thank you. So I'll just go backwards, and the last gentleman that spoke about the maple production, I mean, that's not before you today. I would point out that forestry is an existing permitted use, and the ability to tap maple trees or not is a current permission that our client has. So it's not an approval that we are seeking at this time, but it's an existing permission. Regarding the seasonality of the development, we have discussed, and Mr. Stone has confirmed that can be controlled, that can be regulated. The fact that it's being marketed as Granite Shores and yet it doesn't have Shoreline, I think is a bit of a misnomer, because the Crown Reserve, if it remains, it's public land. So these lots will abut public open space and then the shore. So, you can walk from your cottage front porch across the reserve to the lake. So it is a lakefront development with public access, and many municipalities in the city of Kawartha Lakes, for example, I've done some development along Sturgeon Lake, and they actually maintain the road allowance along the shore. They don't dispose of them. So again, it's cottage development separated either by a road allowance or a Crown Reserve. Mr. Martin, I think I've discussed his concerns. Mr. Thomas, he's concerned, I think his words were cottage sprawl. And I'd just like to point out that the cottage development is permitted as of right by the township official plan and by the county's official plan as well through that shoreline designation. Mr. Reed talked about public access to the lake and how can we guarantee it, and ultimately it's going to become private access only. And we can certainly guarantee public access with easements, with rights of ways, with restrictions on title, guaranteeing county, public, township access to these public open spaces. And if the township and the county wish them to be dedicated, that would be appropriate conditions of draft plan approval that our client would be willing to accept. The suggestion that it needs to be a public road, I would suggest is not appropriate. The public road, as you're aware, is a much wider road allowance, and as a result, the environmental footprint of that road is significantly larger, and it has to be made to municipal standards. A private road is much more flexible. It accomplishes good, safe access and has less of an environmental footprint. So I think we can address many of these concerns that were raised, and we look forward to continued liaison and dialogue with your staff and with members of the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arians. I would now ask if our planner has heard any or received any written comments.
Yes, Warden to members of the council. So what I've done, I could go through the presentation in detail for all those public comments that were received, but I've also included redacted versions of those comments in the actual report. So I'm at your leisure in regards to that. Also too, just as we were conducting the public meeting, we did receive updated comments from the Ministry of Transportation. So I will make that available to the agents after the meeting. So if you would like, I can certainly go through a summary of the comments that were received publicly. And for the benefit of council, the presentation is actually the last attachment to the staff report. If you would like, I will begin with the agency comments. So Canada Post has no issues.
Actually, I think Mr.
Sorry?
If council is in agreement, we do have a list of the comments on our report. And I think it's sufficient, unless there are specific questions about those comments, that we just, receive them as information rather than making you go through them all. If that's satisfactory to council. Okay, do council have any questions at this point of the parties present? Councillor Moffat, and then Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's sort of a comment and then a question. There's much conversation about the public access and it being retained or prevented or better managed. And I think that all parties involved in this need to be careful that public access isn't necessarily a good thing when it's organized through a subdivision or condominium. The condominium corporation can make it seasonal. They can limit motors for their owners and all those kinds of things. But essentially what this does is opens up these lands and those lands surrounding it to become a new public playground, because that's what folks want, is access to Crown land. And we know that because we are ourselves dealing with, it's on our radar, we're dealing with it. We've had meetings with the ministry and we've put forward some comments on that, trying to mitigate what we have stated publicly we believe to be a misuse and abuse of Crown land. So I just think that needs to just be acknowledged there. And my question is around access and the road. It's a yes, no answer. Could the private road that accesses the development and potentially into the Crown land, could it be closed by the corporation if the public access is in time determined to be problematic? Technically, it's a technical question. The answer is yes or no.
The answer is yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you can, that's what I'm looking for is I'm not trying to trap you. I'm just saying that
no.
Their road access can be problematic. And I just want to know that in the future that the condominium board could say there's too many people in here and we vote to close it. So that just needs to be acknowledged.
No. So what we propose, Councillor, is a registered public easement in favor of the county and the township. So the removal of an easement requires the consent of all parties. So as long as all parties agree that there's been an abuse of Crown land, we need to prevent this public access, then it can be lifted, then it can be removed.
Thank you.
For that clarification. Further questions at this point? Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Warden. So mainly it's about process and what happens next, and if maybe our Director of Planning would take us through that, because I've tried to follow this in our local papers, but as we all know, I don't attend Highlands East meetings, so I saw some stuff about that, and then we have this meeting today. What's the next steps, basically concerning County Council? What happens next?
So as indicated by Julia, the agent has the responsibility really addressing all of the concerns that have been raised by the agencies as well as the public. And through the course of addressing those concerns, there may be requirements to modify the design. And if that's the case, then we'll have to recirculate that for comment as well. And so it's in the consultant's bailiwick right now to make sure that they go line by line, more or less, to address those concerns and come up with solutions for them. And then once that's been addressed, then we'll proceed to presenting this back to council with a fulsome report on consistency with provincial policy and conformity with official plans.
Go ahead, Councillor Roberts.
Just to follow up, so is this the only public planning meeting where members of the public can speak, or would we have to do that again where the proponents address that?
So this is the statutory public meeting. So under the Planning Act, you're only required to have one, but if it's council's direction to host another meeting publicly, we can do that as well.
If I may, to continue to just there's a lot going on with this proposal, and while we only physically heard from 3 people, there are other people watching, there are other people concerned, and I just think to come to a good resolution, it wouldn't hurt to hold another public meeting. That's my thoughts.
I definitely agree with Councillor Roberts with respect to the need for another public meeting. There's been a number of questions raised. I'm sure there will be more raised, and I think the public needs to hear the responses to those. Just my thoughts. Councillor DeVolen?
There, I can get it unmuted. It kind of in the spirit of what Councillor Roberts has said. There's the technicality of one, but what's going to come out of the other end of this on behalf of the applicant would be far beyond what I would call a minor or tinkering elements, that it's going to be substantive in nature for a whole bunch of reasons, from MTO, from the reserve portion of it, whatever, so that in the spirit of it, that what will be substantially different, in my opinion, that it absolutely comes back to us.
Do the rest of the members of council concur that another public meeting would be beneficial? Okay. Would we need to revise our resolution to include that, or is that just, would that be just understood?
Oh, I believe that would be just understood.
Okay. Any further questions from council? Could I have should the motion be read before the close of the public meeting or after?
After.
Okay. If the public wishes further information, please forward your request for information with your name, address, and phone number by mail or email to the County of Haliburton's Planning Department. And if there are no further questions, this concludes the public meeting process, and I declare the public meeting closed. Having said that, could I have a mover and a seconder on the resolution? Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Moffat.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received the April 27th, 2022 staff report entitled Public Meeting, Draft Plan of Subdivision, Condominium 46-T-22001, Granite Shores for information, and that Haliburton County Council direct staff to review comments provided to County Council as part of the circulation processes and the public meeting held under the Planning Act in order to determine the merits of proposed draft plan of subdivision and condominium.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you and good morning.
Good morning to you. I would suggest that it might be appropriate time to take a little break. If council is in agreement with that. Is 15 minutes sufficient? So we'll re-adjourn at 10:45. So are we live?
Just 1 second.
Okay.
We're back live, Warden Danielson.
Thank you. I should just clarify that when we adjourned, I should have said reconvene, not re-adjourn. Anyway, next on the agenda are the refinements based on the discussion we had at the previous meeting on the draft shoreline protection bylaw. And with your indulgence, before we hear Steve's report, I do want to make a few comments. Over the 3 terms of council, we've been working on some form of protection for our shorelines and the health of our lakes. And we landed initially, as you all know, on the tree cutting bylaw. Before I get into it, I would just like to address the fact that some people seem to feel that I personally am determined to adopt this bylaw right away. And I do feel that it's important to put some protective measures in place, but I also want us to get it right. I want the document to be fair, and I want it to work to the greatest extent possible that it can for everyone concerned. Since the tree cutting bylaw was established, and with the greatest emphasis on this last term of council, an awful lot of work has been done by both staff and council, by our consultants on our behalf, by many members of the public who've researched the documents and provided comments, voiced concerns, or applauded what's being proposed in various iterations of the bylaw. We have, through a variety of communication methods, heard from the public at large, both seasonal and full-time residents, lake associations, groups from the lakes outside of the actual association, contractors, landscapers, and many more. And some of the comments, even threats, have been a bit hard to swallow for all of us. But one thing is clear, I truly believe that we all generally agree that we want to protect our lakes, we want to protect our economy, and we want to protect property values. But even at this stage, and despite the compromises that we've all made as we've moved through this, I do sense that there's still continuing angst about where we've landed. So I will say this, even though there has been some excellent work done, we do still have work ahead of us with respect to this. Despite having done several legal reviews of initial drafts, the draft bylaw has changed dramatically over the last 2 years. And I think much to the better, thanks to everybody's work. We know we have to have a final legal review completed, and we can't actually adopt the bylaw until that review is done, and we can't move ahead until the review is done and the document is approved. We've got work to do on education, and it's apparent that folks are still not fully understanding all aspects of the document, and despite all the questions that have been raised, that there are still a few remaining questions. And education about best practices or even restoration going forward can be helpful to people that aren't specifically concerned about the details of the bylaw. Should council eventually adopt the bylaw, as I say, it still needs to be adopted by the 4 lower tiers, and changes need to be made to all of our official plans. It's also apparent, given the challenges that we've encountered in hiring staff at all levels, that even if we were to adopt the bylaw immediately after a legal review, I can't see us having staff in place for the upcoming summer season. It just isn't going to happen. We're also faced with a rather sensitive local economy that is just starting to recover from 2 years of COVID restrictions. And it is admittedly a particularly sensitive time to enforce major change. Just thoughts for consideration. In addition, we're about to go into a lame duck position in the very near future, which in essence really precludes us from making any substantive decisions unless they've been budgeted for. And I know that we've established a budget for this, but this is so major. I think that we need to really consider the lame duck aspect of our business. I would like us to agree, at least at a minimum, to keep working on the project. Should it go forward to the next council, they at least will have a solid foundation to work from, even if the document continues to evolve. We spent a lot of money and time and energy considering the best path forward, and we've spent no small amount of money in the meantime. I just want to see that all of that time and investment is put to good use as we move forward, rather than seeing us just shelve it and say, let's be done with it. But let's hear Steve's report, his comments. I'm sure that we'll have questions on his report, and I would like us to have an open discussion about how we move forward. So over to you, Steve.
There we go. Thank you, Warden, members of council. So before you have a report that builds on the report that I did a couple months ago, mainly focusing on how we were going to implement the changes as requested by council last time they had a look at the bylaw. And Jason did work on those refinements, and they show up in the first two attachments of the report. The red line revision is what he did, and what I did is I highlighted it just so that you could see the flow of the wording better. But the most significant changes that I see happening from the council refinements was the idea of only regulating the first 20 meters from the high water mark of our lakes and rivers. And there was also changes to reflect sort of what we would call non-naturally occurring features like ponds, etc. And so those changes are reflected in the bylaw. And I don't know if council would like the opportunity just to discuss those refinements with Jason at this point, or I can go further on into the aspects of how we see this being implemented.
I would suggest that maybe we look at the red line version and before we go into how we would move forward, just to see that it has captured the comments that were made and agreements made by council at our last meeting where we talked about this. So I guess if we could go through it sort of sequentially. Do members of council have specific questions, comments, or concerns about the red line changes that have been made to the document? Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. I need a couple of reminders from Steve. I know I asked this question before, and surprisingly, I didn't write down the answer from our last discussion. I had expressed concern about the possibility, because anything is possible, as we know, about the hiring the county's right to hire, other consultants should the need arise. And I had said, we don't yet know even who would be employed by the county to be the applications examiners or the inspectors. Like, we don't know what qualifications they would have. So can you remind me what your answer was in terms of what would happen if someone has a landscape architect and they're being challenged? I know that's the wrong word, but they're being questioned by a staff person who doesn't have the same qualifications, and yet their position provides them authority to have primacy in that regard. So what was your answer on that, please?
So the answer was twofold. The current practice that we have in play at the county is when we receive a technical report where we don't have the qualifications, we would go to our peer review consultant that we have on retainer. And so, for example, in the plan of subdivision that we were dealing with previously, they were given the suite of studies and then provided analysis on that. The other approach to things is to, and I've done this in previous positions, is to really trust, understand that when you're dealing with consultants that do have certification, that you trust what they submit, and go with their recommendations in terms of what they're doing in terms of landscaping near the water line. What we do in that case is, and we don't have these in effect at this point in the county, but previously in Seguin, for example, we did have waterfront design guidelines, and we just asked that the consultants, when they worked on plans, they made reference to how they were using the recommendations or the guidelines proposed in those guidelines. So that's how I would proceed with applications that were coming in for permit. If we were dealing with rehabilitation, so orders, for example, that we issued, it may be that I would extend that out to a peer review consultant if we were trying to do restorative work that resulted because of orders or works without permits.
If I may, Madam Warden, I feel the need to say that the questions that I ask are questions that have come from the public. So I think it's our job to make sure that we understand them fully. So if somebody came with an application and there was a question, but the person wasn't we've gone all through this, who's a qualified person. So you have somebody who's just been in the business for 40 years, but they don't have any letters after their name. Would you approach it the same way? So I guess the point is, a lot of decisions can be made in a relational manner. So if you know the people and you know the reputation and their history, that would be allowable as well from your perspective.
Yeah, certainly. Again, my past experience has been that it's a very iterative discussion with operators, and they're quite willing, if they have the necessary tools like documents to peruse. They're very, very good at picking that up, and that's what we encourage. So certainly when we're dealing with what I would call a routine applications, it's really something that you build that trust with the operators, and they're quite proud of their work, and we would support them in their efforts going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions about the red line version of the document? Councillor Moffat.
I need another reminder. Contracts that are currently underway. I spent much of yesterday afternoon on the telephone with a number of people, and I know we talked about it last time because a contractor had asked me previously, and I did ask the question, and once again, for some reason, didn't write it down. There are contractors who have multi-year jobs or jobs under contract a couple of years in advance, and I know you told me what the answer to that would be. Can you just remind? That's my only other reminder, but I do have some other comments.
So thank you. Section 13 refers to transition and effective date. So let's say, for example, you approve it today and the effective date is today. So it would be any works that were initiated prior to the date of the bylaw being brought in to effect. They would be able to proceed accordingly. Any works not initiated would have to be tested on whether it requires a permit. If it requires a permit, they would have to apply.
And does it, so then if I may, Madam Warden, so the initiation would be considered a deposit or a contract or something of that nature?
Well, I would suggest that initiation would be you've turned dirt, you've cut trees down.
Okay, so if you have an arrangement for somebody to be doing work for you a year from now, you would still be subject to the bylaw should it be in place by the time the work starts.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Continue with your questions.
Am I the only one again?
Well, you're the only one who's put your hand up so far.
Okay. I wondered too, just got looking at, and I do appreciate the changes, and I really appreciate the examples that were given. I think that provided a lot of clarity, and I did hear from people that suddenly for some reason, suddenly a lot of it made sense. In terms of securities having to be posted against a Canadian bank, I appreciate the purpose of that. There's a lot of people who don't hold all their portfolio in a Canadian bank. Is that just sorry about your luck? Because is there any other way that someone could post a security other than a registered Canadian bank? Or is that another conversation that would be had where that flexibility is between the parties?
Yes, that would be something that we could, as you say, discuss flexibility. I know previously they would just provide us with monies that would be retained by the finance department in Seguin, so that may be an option here as well. But yes, on the very large projects, and there were some very large landscaping projects in Seguin, securities were in the neighborhood of $5 million on one particular project. So in that case, you'd want it through the bank system.
Carry on.
Carry on. In Schedule B, item number 3, again, they make sense. Just for clarification, the owner shall not modify the plan without prior approval to the director. So again, looking for that, I don't want to say wiggle room because that can be a negative term, but that relational flexibility in terms of we're doing work, the plan's been approved, and we started doing the earthworks, and yikes, we found the Canadian Shield, which is very common in Haliburton County. So what the main thing I'm hearing from people is, aside from the people that just hate the bylaw in its as a conceptual standalone item, is the process and the potential for works and projects that are pre-planned to be slowed down. So if somebody has a plan that the county's approved and they come across the Canadian Shield, which again, we've just said is quite common around here, are we assured that our turnaround time is not going to slow things down to negatively affect the economy? Like, how fast can you turn around? Well, we need to move the stairs. Like, you could just make a decision to move the stairs and it doesn't significantly alter the plan in terms of impact, but it alters the plan in terms of what has previously been approved. So again, is that a quick call to you like, yikes, Steve, we hit stone. Can we just move 10 feet to the left? Or what would that look like?
Well, past experience was you get a call in the morning and you try to be out there in the afternoon to help with finding a solution. In the planning business, we refer to changes to plan as red line revisions, and you can have them what I would call, and we do use this term, minor red lines, and you can have major ones. The minor red lines are things that you can do on the fly. Certainly have a meeting on site, for example, and change the drawings and everybody's understanding. And then the inspector or myself go back to the office and just make a file note to that effect, and the project carries on. If it's a major change, what would be a major change? For example, they discover, as you say, significant bedrock and they need to blast. So that may warrant a bit of a stop on that. Previously, what we used to do in Seguin was we wanted to have a good understanding of the volume of material blasted out, and so we would have somebody draw us an extra drawing to that effect, so that we would have it on file. And because blasting being what it is, and we had some situations where contractors errantly blasted rock into the water, we wanted to make sure there was sufficient conditions employed to ensure that blast rock was removed from the shoreline area or to an appropriate quarry for crushing. So that may be one where there's a major red line, and we have to ask for some additional drawings.
Okay, thank you.
But to answer your question, it really is something that's we work at the site level to find solutions to carry on with what's being proposed.
Great, thank you.
We will go to Councillor DeVolen, then Roberts.
So some of these changes or inspections or things that happen along the way, they're really not too dissimilar with what we deal with our CBOs and building permits for buildings with changes that happen along the way. Would you say that would characterize it, Steve?
That's right. Some of the examples that I provided with the access points, often, well, in Seguin, for example, there was a number of island properties, and they didn't permit access points to the water. Just was the nature of the bylaw. So we often would have to arrange boat rides through the contractor to go out and visually inspect. And even when we're out visually inspecting, there would be a consensus reached on the route to go, what to avoid, how to rehabilitate. And that would be reflected in any plans that were submitted. And if they got into it, they found that it was a bit too steep, for example, on a couple occasions, we just worked with the contractor to ensure that the grades weren't too steep, and move the access points or the driveways around to accommodate machinery, et cetera. So you did that on the fly.
Then answer your question. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Warden. First of all, thank you for the red line version, which I think captured what we talked about at the last meeting, and also then the clean version, but yet still highlighted. It's really easier to see on a computer, and the examples at the end with photographs, etc. So I appreciate all of that. This question again comes from somebody who's reached out to me. We've had a flurry of emails, phone calls, texts, etc. in the last couple of days. And it's regarding the financial impact in your report. And it talks about a site alteration permit fee of $100 and then a site alteration works without permit of $500. Can you explain the what that means?
Sure. Listening to council's ideas about how to implement the bylaw in a way that was reasonable. What I did is originally the bylaw was set to have a minor and a major application process, and then I thought, no, council really wants its implementation to be successful. Certainly to use the first year to monitor how it was. So that's where I came up with one flat rate for $100. What I did with the $500 charge is reflective of, again, what we used to do in Seguin. So when we had a minor variance application, it was a nominal fee. About what happened in some instances is the works were initiated prior to the approval of the Committee of Adjustment. And so what we did is we would implement a fee accounting for works that weren't approved. So that's what the $500 fee in this, it's a mirror of that. We show up on site and we find that the works have already been initiated, and it's noting with the owner or the contractor, you still need a permit here. You please apply, but your fee now is $500 for that.
So if I may, so in a way, it's a bit of a penalty. And I think that read a little bit confusing, like, wait a second, I pay $500. Like it was confusing. So similar to, municipal staff, local municipal staff can go on site. Somebody's applying for a building permit for something over here and they see something over there that never had a building permit that should have. They can still apply, but it's, I believe, double the fee. So, okay, I think that clarifies that question for now. Thanks.
Thank you for that question. It was one of mine as well. It just didn't seem clear to me. Okay, further questions? Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, similar to the comments that have been made, I'm really quite surprised that the questions have slowed down for this time around, and I'm going to take that as a good sign. But we did receive one that I found interesting, and it was a question about the OP. And I did, one of my questions that I had written down is, can we just go through whether we have again or not the OP changes and what they would be? Because the author of that email that we all received, it was to you, Steve, but it was also to us, was about around the OP and lake streams and rivers and the decision we made in that regard. So we also don't want to make a decision that undoes other good works in land use planning. So can you just go over that with me and the specificity of that?
So the policies in terms of shoreline protection in both the county and the township official plans are very robust, but they deal with primarily with new development. So for example, if you're creating lots, it's a vacant lot and you want to build a new cottage, the requirement is for 30 meters away from the high water mark of our lakes. And that's usually reflected in site-specific zoning as well as a condition of approval in regards to new development. So we saw that discussion occurring in the previous subdivision application. So that would hold true for any other new development along the waterfront. In terms of site alteration, there may be some minor adjustments to the official plans just to reflect the 20-meter requirement. But when I was quizzed by the Ministry of Environment, I explained the circumstances and they saw no issue with regard to the 20-meter site alteration requirements. So going forward, I don't think there will be significant changes to official plan policy related to a site alteration bylaw. With respect to what was received, I guess it was late yesterday, and I think the statement was in reference to streams, ponds, etc. That being said, it's very specific to the bylaw itself, and again, it was a choice of council to sort of refine the bylaw to eliminate a couple things, but as it relates to natural features, they are still well covered by planning policy in our official plans, and they're also covered off in terms of natural features in the refined bylaws. So again, I don't see there being much tinkering to the official plans to implement the site alteration bylaw. But I will have a more fulsome review of that once, if council directs this to proceed to a legal review. I think the next report, I'll have a more fulsome analysis in that regard.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
That's okay. This goes to the examples at the end that I referenced. But the one thing that I had a little bit of trouble with is the example of a request for septic system replacement. So, because we can't do anything that already contravenes a local municipality septic and requirements and inspection. And it was that someone wants, the example given was that someone wants to have their replace a septic system at 8.5 meters to the high water mark. Like, are we going to permit that? I don't know that we do in Dysart. I don't know what the other, it just jumped out at me because that's the whole, one of the biggest problems. Forget about excavating and making a nice stone patio for a fire pit. This is why would we permit a septic system, even if the old one was there? Sometimes people have to move it across their road. Surely to goodness, we're not permitting septic systems 8.5 meters to the water.
So this good point. So if you look at that example, which would be on page 60 of the report, I believe, the actual septic system itself, if you were to look at it from a structure standpoint, is outside the 15 meter meter mark. The sort of the infiltration area or the seepage area is closer to the lake. So what we were doing there was, and it's the important mantle area. So technically, it's not the septic system itself. It's just the sand that sort of allows for disbursement of that. So again, Seguin had a unique bylaw in the sense that they didn't require, they didn't allow these types of things to be within 20 meters. So a little bit more restrictive than the Ontario Building Code and what was happening in Halliburton. But this was a good example of where we actually had the actual physical system ran parallel to the shoreline, and the mantle just allowed for better sand to allow for processing of or evaporation. So that's why it went through an approval exemption process.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Other questions? Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, thanks. If we're moving to the examples, my big question marks and exclamation points were on the site alteration permit for blasting. And similarly to Councillor Roberts' questions, I was quite surprised that there would be permission for blasting 6.5 meters from a shoreline. So that, in my mind, seems to be completely the opposite of what it is we're trying to do. And but I know there's a reason not. Now, I do know that in the body of the text, it talks about a new marina building. So is this something? Anyway, I won't ask any specific questions, but can you talk to me about blasting 6.5 meters from a shoreline and how that's not contradicting what it is we're trying to do?
So in that example, it would be, I guess, page 55. That was an existing marina building. So that would have been their house as well as their office and commercial storefront. So yes, it was very close to the water line. And again, in Seguin, what we used to do is if they could replace this structure with a building permit in its whereas as is, then they would get their exemption. So that would be very similar to this particular one. If they were to blast where the existing building was, then they would be okay. They wouldn't require a permit. In this instance, they had the structure was lost to fire. They had a number of encroachments on the public boat ramp, and there was consensus that it would be better to shift the foundation of the house, office, commercial store to the west, and as a result of that, it would require an approval. So that's the example that we were given here, and it's one of those things that if this was a brand new situation, they would not be allowed to blast because they'd be outside the 15. We had an existing building that burned down. We had encroachments that we wanted to address, and then it was agreed to move it further to the west. Approvals were required. We were able to get things like conditions to control the blasting from a time period, and also removal of the material outside the 20 meters. So again, a very open discussion with the owner and contractor, and solutions were found and approvals granted. It's a wonderful, wonderful store now.
Thank you.
Just one quick question before I get to you, Councillor Kennedy. Just on your report, Steve, under monitoring and enforcement, the last paragraph references, it is proposed that the applicability of the new bylaw remain consistent with the existing bylaw, being the terrestrial area 30 meters from the shoreline. Should that now be 20 meters?
Yeah, that might have been an oversight on my part.
Okay, just double check.
Yes, that would read 20 meters.
Okay. Over to you, Councillor Kennedy.
Well, thank you, Madam Warden. I'm not sure if this is the opportune time to make this statement, but I haven't taken apart this latest version of the bylaw. I've read it. I'm pleased with the progress that everybody has made and the efforts have been put into it. At this point, I'm wondering if this might be a time for us to defer the actual bylaw, but use the time until a new council comes in and has the opportunity to look at it. But use the interim in moving this forward behind the scenes. In other words, getting the cart back behind the horse There's lots of things that need to happen before the bylaw comes into effect, in my opinion, that will lessen confusion. So we use the time, as you referenced earlier, education. I'm not sure which version of the bylaw it is, 7, 8, or 9. But I was even getting calls as late as last night on what actually was like version 6. So there's still so much misinformation out there. So what I'm proposing is that Steve would still go ahead and try and hire the staff now. That's going to be a challenge in itself. But in the interim, until the bylaw comes back up before a new council, that we would determine such things as the amount of waterfront that's in good shape, regenerative, or bad shape. We've got a number of areas that we can draw that information from. What I'm trying to get to is let's establish a baseline if we can, and then establish some tentative goals of where we want the program to go in the meantime. As Steve has alluded to, it's a good opportunity for us to identify upper and lower tier official plans sections that may need to be addressed. And that would be done coming forward to the new council to look at as part of their consideration for putting this bylaw through. And then also we need to identify lower tier bylaws that may need to be altered, not just official plans. I know we've got in this situation, one of your examples here, we allow boat launches, private boat launches down on your property, and that doesn't seem to be covered here. Those types of things that are unique to one township or another, just so we get that sort of out of the way. Develop and implement a public education campaign on shoreline preservation. The Coles Notes version that Councillor Moffat refers to repeatedly. I gave you a promotion there. I'm really pleased with where we've come with this. I think I'd just like us to buy this 6 months or 7 months, whatever it happens to be, and get some of these background things caught up to where we are now. And I'll leave it at that. I've got more things here like transition process, those types of things. So.
Well, and that's the kind of discussion that I'm looking for with respect to just touching on the first point that you made about staffing.
Yeah.
The issue of staffing is something that I have had a bit of an issue with kind of right from the get-go. I would like to, 3 staff right off the hop seems like a huge step. And maybe I'm completely wrong in this, but it seemed to me that, we need to see how this is going to flow. And I could see hiring, the 2 individuals, but not 3. And that's assuming that the bylaw is going to go forward. On the other hand, if we decide that we're going to just kind of slow down and take a look at some of the things that you're suggesting, that it's my position that we should probably be looking at hiring a bylaw officer now. Because part of the arguments are that we're not enforcing the tree cutting bylaw sufficiently well, or monitoring some of the activity that's going on. We're constantly being told, why are you passing new bylaws when you're not enforcing the ones that you've got? And I really think that whether this bylaw is adopted by this council now or not, and not now, but in the next few months or not, I think that we need to move forward with bylaw enforcement and monitoring and activity. That's just a thought that I'm putting out there for us to think about. I see Councillor DeVolen's hand up.
I guess the thoughts that come to mind, and I thoroughly understand the warden's hesitation and Councillor Kennedy's, but I tell you a fear that I have. The fear that I have that if we don't lay some what I'll call foundational, not be able to go backwards, I think that this is going to be the singularly hot list item in the municipal election. And my fear is not in and of itself that that's a bad thing. But what I always don't like to see in any level of politics is single issue candidates. And my fear is this will be a polarizing thing that if we don't make some decisions or institutionalize where we go forward with this, is what's going to happen. And in my own experience in other places where these things have happened, councils at all level, upper or lower tier, that are significantly comprised, and I'll bring Port Carling in the Muskokas where I lived and I'm fairly familiar with. It's a mess. And I get the spirit of what Councillor Kennedy and the warden's talking about here, but that's my cautionary tale on that side. If we filing opens in less than a week, and do I suspect in some wards and jurisdictions, there will be cottage associations and or others that are going to put single issue candidates up. And like I say, I have no vested interest in this progress after this term of council, but I fear for what can happen if we don't make some decisions about foundationally where we can go with this.
I would have hoped that the work that we've done so far has formed a bit of a foundation. Now, I know it's not adopted, but I mean, the fact is we need to have a legal review before we can adopt the document. There's steps that, I mean, we can look at, as Pat said, we can start to clearly identify the changes that need to be made in the official plans and other bylaws at the lower tier without actually making those changes. We can have it ready to go. That kind of work that we can do. But you know what? I think there's always going to be single issue candidates. We're looking at short-term rentals, and that could be just as big an issue as this one is. You know, as it goes forward, and we'll likely always have single issue candidates. I'm hoping that what we've got is a good foundation, but maybe as you're saying, Councillor DeVolen, it needs to be something adopted and formally put in place. Can't do that yet though, and the timing is getting to a point where it's not great. Councillor Roberts and then Councillor Moffat.
Through you, Warden, could I have one small question on the bylaw, and then if I could speak also to Deputy Mayor Kennedy's, or it's not Deputy Mayor, it's Councillor Kennedy and Councillor DeVolen's thing. So my quick question is about the trees at 5 centimeters breast height. If we reduce the bylaw to 20 meters, does that include then the size of the trees? And just because it's hard to look at both bylaws and I forgot, so if you could just remind me, are we still including trees at 30 meters and then the rest is at 20 meters?
No,
so
it would be everything 20 meters to the shoreline.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that. So my comment about starting with Councillor Kennedy's remarks and also Councillor DeVolen's, and so, you know, from March 9th, I made a clear statement that I didn't think this was the time to pass the bylaw. And I listed several reasons. I do think that it would be very wise to have the legal review. I think we're very close. So when I look through the actual recommendations at the top of this whole report, one was to receive and one was to send it to a lawyer, but the third was about hiring staff to get ready to implement. And I hesitate on that, but I have been putting more thought into that, and not in my mind passing the bylaw now, but there is still an opportunity for staff in the planning department. And I don't know that they need to be a bylaw officer per se, but to have staff in the planning department to be dedicated to this. Steve has so much on his plate. We do have money in the 2022 budget. I would propose hiring one staff to start off this project, to be the keeper of the what happens with whether the bylaw, but there are opportunities this summer to be promoting education, to do a social media and a radio and paper campaign for opportunities of things that we actually know that are affecting shoreline health, know that are affecting our lake, but couldn't put in a bylaw. And that could be that under the planning department's purview, staff, sorry, Steve, to make you hire another person, but we were going to sort of anyway. And there are opportunities for how to revitalize your shoreline, how to do this and how to have a healthy shoreline, how to that person could go to lake association meetings. That person could be the point person. And so that is what my preference is. If it does come to a bylaw in my next few months of being on county council, I will vote no on the bylaw, not because I don't agree with it, but because I do think it's an election issue. There's going to be a lot of election issues. So I'm not ready to pass a bylaw at the end of my term when 4 of us are not going to be here next time. But I am in favor of going to the lawyer, getting a legal opinion, continuing with this very important process, hiring a staff person for this summer, creating the job description for that person and what they can do. And I think there's a lot of things we could be doing actively at the county to promote promote healthy lakes and the shoreline.
Yeah, that's not actually far off the comments that I was making about, you know, having a staff person in place now, no matter what we do. And you know, I can see all of those things happening. Councillor Moffat and then Councillor Rao.
Thank you. I am trying to collect my notes and thoughts because they're kind of scattered around, and you know, I think what I have found the most difficult is I agree with everybody. I mean, I think Councillor DeVolen makes a really good point. One of the, you know, I have the same fears, and there's already talk out there of you know, the anti-shoreline people are going to overturn council and rule the world, and you know, that is, to Councillor DeVolen's point, the worst possible thing to delaminate the progress of, you know, the last 20 years in, not in this one item, but across all sectors and fronts of the work that's been done and achieved. So I think everybody needs to be well aware of the danger of one issue candidates should they come forward. However, I don't want to make a decision because there's an election coming. I'm happy with the investments we've made. I think we've done some really good work. I feel that I'm listening to the people who are contacting me, and I'm asking the questions they want asked and to get answers for. We will never satisfy the people who are just simply mad about it, but they can't articulate why. And we will never capture the bad apples who are going to do what they're going to do no matter what we do or don't put in place. So I almost feel like it should be a bad apple bylaw, as opposed to, I was going to use a different word, but I thought I couldn't do that in this position. You know, the majority, for the average property owner and the majority of contractors, this bylaw won't even touch their lives. And people are continuing to misbelieve that they're going to have to take down their bunkie and remove their fire pit, and the kids can't play on the shoreline, and it's all nonsense. And I don't know where that stuff comes from. So that's been really, really frustrating. I want to speak, if I can, just a moment to Councillor Kennedy's comment about shorelines and whatnot. And I was some time ago contacted by the person who analyzed the 13,000 properties in the Love Your Lakes program. And he generated all the reports. His name is John McCarty, and he's on Coagama Lake, and he said that I could say his name out loud. He said that it is true that 45% of the shorelines assessed are in a natural state, but he also said that 30% of the shorelines were determined to be in a regenerative state already. So there's some discussion around 45 and 30 equals 75, which is what we're aiming for. So, you know, is it possible to achieve what we want by having to the warden's point, hiring people to generate data, go back to...
What is the background noise that we're hearing?
Yeah, I'm sorry, excuse me.
Just all take a deep breath for a moment.
I think there might have been a dog involved.
Yeah, maybe. Large dog.
Last child, apologies. No, it was summer chores or spring chores. So, you know, in trying to craft, I want us to keep moving forward. If it doesn't get to where it needs to be by the end of the council, by the end of this term, then it does become an issue in the hands of the next council, just because of the timeline. So if there's talk of or support for hiring some staff, could that staff be involved in the review of that and to generate some in-house stats? One of the consistent themes is what appears to be a lack of data. I have said a number of times that I remain disappointed that we didn't get the community comparators. So we're kind of standalone. I was excited to learn that Mr. Stone had done this very work in Seguin, and have certainly appreciated what he's brought to the table in the last couple of meetings, where there were some of those gaps. And so trying to take all those apparently disparate thoughts and put them together, I think there's an opportunity to keep working, keep refining, create a body of work that can keep moving forward on a number of fronts. I don't believe we'll get where we need to be by the end of the term. I do not want to stop our conversations or further refinements or work because of an election. It's going to be an election issue anyway. So I think we keep working and see where we get.
Thank you. Councillor Royale?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what's been said, and I really agree with what Councillor Roberts is basically saying. I think to rush out and hire 3 people, to me, we don't even know what they're going to be doing, and at the end of the day, we're pretty sure that something's going to happen. But I think one good key point person that would help Steve get this thing done so it stays going. I think everybody said the same thing, and I'm certainly echoing it. We have gone way too far to throw this thing out. Like we're almost there. The challenges that I'm getting now from the people that I'm dealing with are no longer related to wording. There's always going to be a disagreement of whether it should be this word or that word, or this phrase should be turned around and put in one direction. But those are not major issues right now. The major issues that I'm getting and I'm hearing from is, how's the whole thing going to work? How much is it going to cost us? How are you guys going to pay for it? And what at the end of the day is going to change as a result of it? And are we going to include certain things that are important, but not necessarily related to preservation? And we talked about pesticides, we talked about all those wonderful things. And at the end of the day, they are important. But do they belong in this bylaw? And if they don't, where do they belong? And possibly somebody that that would be dedicated to streamlining the shoreline protection or preservation bylaw would be able to say, hey, listen, that's important. Here's where we could put that. Now, I'm not saying that we stop everything we're doing to solve that particular issue, but it becomes on a checklist of things that need to be resolved, along with official plans and all those kind of things. So at the end of the day, I think I'm going to have to join the group that says I am not ready to approve this bylaw. And at this point in time, I don't see it in the next couple of months either, because I think there's way too much more important work that needs to be completed, because this has it has the essence of being an awesome made in Haliburton County bylaw. And I think that's what we need.
Councillor Shell, did I see your hand up or no?
You didn't, but I would like to speak to it, because I
was going to ask you to.
Yeah, well, I picked, there's little things that everybody has said that I'm in agreement with, but I would think what Councillor Roberts and Councillor Moffat had said, probably where I'm kind of leaning as well. We've come too far. We can't let it go. But I don't think, for the amount of time and effort and money that we've put into this, I don't think there's a need to push it really quickly through, just because, like Carol had, or pardon me, Councillor Moffat had said, that it's an election year. We know it's going to become an issue at the all candidates meetings. And if it wasn't this, it would just be something else. So anyway, I think we carry on as we were doing. I do like the idea of a bylaw officer, although I know that is kind of difficult to find, as we know in Minden Hills, but that's even something we get at the municipal level all the time is, you have all these bylaws, but you're not enforcing them. So 2 things, we need people to enforce them, but we need it to have teeth so that it can be enforceable. So I'm all with continuing the course and carrying forward.
I'm just going to go to Councillor Burton first and then back to you, Councillor Moffat.
Thank you, Warden. I wholeheartedly agree with Lisa's just last statement. And, we do realize that there has been a lot of hard work, a lot of money, a lot of time, effort put into it. I would hate to see us just drop it right now. I have no problem moving forward cautiously. If we decide to hire a bylaw officer, by all means, let's do that. I think, as Lisa said, we're going to have our trials and tribulations doing that, but let's try and see what we come up with. And like I say, I would like to see us not just drop it totally, but just move along cautiously and move forward.
Councillor Roberts, sorry, Councillor Moffat. I've got you listed here and I forget to cross you off. Councillor Moffat.
That's according to Councillor Kennedy, that's Senator Moffat. But anyway, I want to just take a chance to put in a pitch. I know that it's slightly off topic, but it's not. As everyone has said, so much thought, so many phone calls, so many conversations, so much thinking about all of this. I think we're all headed in the same direction, but we're at various places sort of in the field. There's some other things that I think need to be considered all together. I know we can't manage them all, but I'm going to say my piece here. I find it frustrating. I know the public certainly has as well, that we don't have the same septic inspection program across the entire county. One. I think we do need to participate in and to develop and participate in some sort of data sharing project for water quality. That's been mentioned a number of times, and I think there's value in that. To that end, ULinks has its Woodlands and Waterways EcoWatch program, which is starting. We've all been asked to send, we did send letters of support for that application to the Great Lakes Fund. And I think there's some work to be done there. I think there needs to be a reaffirmation of addressing external pressures, even though at the moment we can't control them, but things are moving in that regard, because we were just asked, and we did make a submission to the ministry around floating accommodations and jurisdictions in a number of levels. I will also like to put in a bit of a pitch, like continued conversation, and similarly to Brent, to Councillor DeVolen, I won't be here next time either, but in 2019, we talked about, I brought forward an idea, and we talked about creating our own watershed council to capture all the things we're working on, from climate to emergency management, lakes, fisheries, all of the things that part of a significant portion of which this bylaw captures. So I would love there to be a commitment that we're going to keep refining this bylaw to the best it can be, to Councillor Rael's point, to be the best bylaw that can be, but also a commitment to consolidate the works of others, the good works of others in our community, into one body where this would all live. And I think it's a huge task, but I think there's tremendous value in continuing to consider that. Everything we've been talking about at the county table over the last couple of years lives inside a potentially Haliburton-made watershed council. And I say watershed because it's the Upper Trent watershed. So you've got CEWF and the Upper Trent Watershed Management, Water Management Partnership. There's a number, CHA, ULinks, there's a number of organizations that are all doing great work by themselves. And there needs to be consideration at some point of consolidating all that great work into one place. That's my speech for today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just, with respect to the Watershed Council, I absolutely can see the positive aspect of doing that. I'm wondering how we would handle that at this point. Would that be documented as an item that we put on in a strategic planning session for the next council, as an item that we want to consider and move forward with? Do you see that being how we might look at that?
If you're asking me, yes. I'm just trying to get my spoke in for that, but I don't want it to divert from what's on the table today, which is shoreline bylaw. So well, that's if people support that, yeah, set it aside, keep it in mind, but we need to get back to but absolutely, yes.
Okay, Councillor DeVolen.
And I would say, to extend that thought, that obviously when we've dealt with all the quantitative water issues, and now this deals in my mind with qualitative water issues, is a watershed council vis-a-vis a conservation authority, and the cost and benefits of those two different models that are kind of the big umbrella that are done elsewhere in that regard.
Councillor Roberts.
Thanks. I just want to go back to the recommendation that I had made about the hiring of the staff. It would not be a bylaw officer role, is what I'm seeing. We already have a bylaw officer that we subcontract out or contract out to enforce the current bylaw, the tree bylaw that we have. My thought was more that it was someone who would have a bit of a planning background, a bit of an environmental slant, somebody who would be involved in, as Councillor Moffat said, getting the data for Haliburton County, reviewing what we have in place right now, this potential new bylaw, promotion of healthy lakes. So I don't think we need a bylaw officer. We have one. I think we need somebody in the planning department, and that Steve and Mike could work, and Sarah Hume could work together to see what that role could look like. That's what I'm proposing. Doesn't mean what everybody else is thinking, but I don't think we need another bylaw officer.
I see what you mean about the benefits of a sort of a multi-purpose individual, because I think that there's a lot of work that can be done, and we can't dump it all on Steve, and we're still not at a full complement in our planning department, which creates another problem. However, I still believe that there is also additional work or some strengthening of our bylaw activity, because it's just not on. We're all hearing that our bylaws are not being enforced sufficiently. And how can you move forward if you can't enforce what you've already got? Yes, we have a bylaw officer, and I know that we've added to that complement. But there's also a large aspect of his work that is related to forestry and good forestry practices that takes away from this. So, I think there needs to be maybe a bit more discussion about, should we agree? And I am hearing that we're all sort of leaning towards, no matter what we do, let's hire another staff person as quickly as we can to help us with this. I see agreement on that, but I'd like to hear more, just a little bit more about what that person might do. Brent and then Cease.
I guess I agree 80 or 90% with Councillor Roberts, but I think it would be very productive from both an understanding point of view and on occasion when that an MLEO ticket in their back pocket, as well as those other skills sets, would have great value. And I would lead it up to the Director of Planning to give us advice, what skill sets, given all that what our Director of Planning has heard, and it's a mountain of stuff, what skill sets and or tools that candidate should have in their toolbox.
Would you just clarify MLEO, please? You're on mute.
Municipal Law Enforcement Officer.
Okay,
correct, Steve?
Cease, and then we'll go to Steve.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Andrea or Councillor Roberts just said, but at the same time, I understand that we do have a deficiency in some bylaw enforcement. So, I mean, we could have this person coming on as the main player. Their prime directive, if you want to use a Star Trek type, is to work on the bylaw itself and to get things going. But at the end of the day, there's no reason why they could not be working with bylaw issues that relate to that, so that would enhance their ability to interpret the new bylaw as it should and could be developed. So I think having somebody whose prime directive is not necessarily bylaw enforcement, but could be used for bylaw enforcement, would move us, I think, in both directions forward. One, we'd have no way we're going to lose control over the progress that we've made so far on the shoreline preservation bylaw. We are going to be using that person to enforce some bylaw enforcement that's related to that particular issue. And at the end of the day, it's a double win. So if that's the route we're going to take, I would totally support that.
Let's always remember that in the realm of planning, our main guy is always going to be Steve Stone, not the new person. Steve, your thoughts on that? I mean, you're hearing, you and Mike are both hearing kind of what we're looking for in an individual. I'd like to hear your thoughts, and obviously you might have to spend a bit of time putting your heads together.
So it's just off the top of my head, thinking quickly, what I'm hearing is council really wants to have what I would term a lake health program that includes shoreline protection, water quality, footprint, if you want to say, stewardship focus. So that's what I'm hearing. So for example, in Sequin, we did have a water quality program that was headed up by the planning department. So we cycled water testing throughout the municipality. We would do lakes every 3 years and monitor the water quality. That set sort of the parameters for, shoreline protection, development controls, etc. in the township. We also had a lake stewardship program where we had individuals who would go out and assess and work on lake planning, etc., etc. The other sort of good program that we could beg, borrow, and steal from in regards to lake health would be that at the District of Muskoka. So our program at Seagoon was tied into their lake health program. So that's something that, if you want a more wholesome or fulsome approach to, the Watershed Council perspective, CAA approach, Certainly there are programs, like the Muskoka District that do have active summertime programs. They hire students to go out and assess shorelines. So that's something that if council wants, we certainly the planning department could build upon that and develop its own programming in the future for that. So
keeping in mind that we don't want to duplicate the work of others, that we can partner with and use the information others have available to us, rather, but not duplicate work. Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the Muskoka Watershed Council was his basis upon which I'd made the suggestion in 2019. And it encompasses all of those things. And exactly to your point, Madam Warden, that's what I was going to say is others are doing this work. And the community, we keep saying the community is changing and has changed where it just can't be what it used to be. And so as we grow and develop and more people are choosing to be here, we know from the census data, et cetera, that it makes sense to be flexible and responsive to that. And I really do see the time is nigh to make that step into a bigger, to create something bigger that draws on the good work of other organizations that have been done. Doesn't mean they would be eliminated. It's time for the county to own and operate a lot of this stuff at some level. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it is as participating in the work that's been done and continues to be done, but having it sort of live in one place. And I almost see this like somebody coming in to be sort of the Corey McKay of this kind of thing. Somebody who comes in who's really knows what they're doing and makes good solid progress to get us somewhere. Well, the last thing we need is to wander around in circles for years. We need to get somewhere, and we need to get somewhere relatively soon, and we can build upon the work that's been done to date to get there, while also incorporating some other much needed initiatives to protect this community and keep it on the right track going forward.
So I think you've heard kind of council's thoughts with respect to, that we would like to see one member of staff or one new staff member to look at a variety of things, including looking at or establishing baseline information, looking at the changes that are required in the OPs and other bylaws at the lower tiers, developing educational programs, also looking at water quality programs and how we can tie in with that, as well as some, from time to time, bylaw enforcement activities. So I think that we would probably look to amend the resolution to reflect that wish of council. I also, with respect to the resolution that we have before us, I think I heard agreement that we do need to proceed with a legal review. That's part of the work that we need to do going forward, and that we continue on. Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, what about the late breaking report that came yesterday from Hutchison Environmental Services? I mean, Sciences, it came late. I haven't even read it yet. What's our plan for folding that into our discussions?
I'm sorry, I had spoke to council, I think, before we went live, and I meant to address that at the beginning of this discussion and just missed that fact. Because we received it, when we received it, and we haven't all had a chance to look at it, and in the interests of transparency for the public, because it's responding to some of the comments that have been made by the public, that we would put that on our committee of the whole agenda for discussion and for formal receipt. So if that works, we also have received another letter from a local contractor that might warrant some discussion at that time as well. But given the timing and that neither one of them are on the agenda, we will address them at our next meeting. Any other comments before I ask Mr. Rudder to read a draft resolution? Tell us, and before I go any further, I'd just like to say, and I should have said at the beginning of our discussion, to welcome Jason to sit in. be available to respond to any questions on the red line version of the bylaw. We really appreciate the work that you've done on this bylaw. We know it has not been an easy task. And I assume that this discussion that we've had has probably been informative for you, given all the work that you've done on this particular file. Thank you for being here. So can we hear a draft or hear your resolution?
I just want to say beforehand, this is why you pay me the big bucks, okay? I think I've captured what you've said. So be it resolved that Haliburton County Council directs staff to continue refinement of the draft shoreline preservation bylaw, that staff be directed to engage a solicitor for the review of the draft shoreline preservation bylaw as amended, that staff be directed to recruit or to to recruit a monitoring enforcement team with job descriptions to be approved by county council. I think I'd really like, before I go on, I'd really like to sit and talk to Steve about what that could look like and how we move forward. That staff be directed to undertake a proposal or to develop a proposal for a lake health program, which would include the following. The percentage of shoreline that remains in a natural or regenerative state, establish recommended targets for naturalization, review upper and lower tier bylaws and planning documents and identify those that require amendments, develop a public information that could be shared now and if and when a bylaw is adopted. Does that capture?
I think it does. I'll go to you, Councillor Moffat, but I'm a little, I know that you need to discuss the details of what the word team is the word that I'm a little bit concerned about, because we're talking about a person, but I understand that you would need to look at the future team that we would have in place and how those responsibilities would be divided up. But I just, at this point, we're not talking about hiring a team. We're agreeing to hire a person.
Again, no recruitment would actually take place until you had approved those job description, and I actually have S within brackets. I think one of the challenges we've had through this process is there's been this belief in the community that will require a great big enforcement team in order to do this. I think it's really important that we define what that looks like moving forward. So I don't think we've done that at this point, but I think we get a sense of where council want us to go. But I really think we need to more clearly define what that could look like in the future, just because of the conversation that's been generated in the community about that.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Moffat?
Thank you. Two things. That in the language in the resolution that Mr. Rutter just read, a little bit nervous about saying that about the shoreline assessment. That work has been done quite extensively. So can we just want to take what's been done. I don't want to say take something that's been done and do something with it, but I can't find the words. But we don't want to reinvent the wheel here. So that the Love Your Lakes program has the data. So work with the people who've done the work to date to incorporate the data into whatever comes next. Those are terrible words. And I also feel that the process that we've undertaken to date, while painful at times, especially with today's conversation, I think it's been helpful for framing a bigger, longer term vision for the community. And at the end of the day, that's a really good outcome for democracy. So yeah, thank you.
So can I use the words confirm and update the percentage of shoreline that remains in a naturalized and or regenerative state? I'm going back to Councillor Kennedy's comments early on that you wanted to if I understood them correctly, you wanted to talk about what those percentages actually are and what our target should be.
Yeah. And I think collaborate with other agencies that may have that data, and other agencies that have other relevant data, not just that, but other relevant data. Water qualities, the dissolved oxygen contents, a lot of the work that lake steward programs and lake associations and CHA have done. There's a wealth of information there that if we could be the keeper of the info and the data, as Councillor Moffat says, we can move this forward fairly quickly and identify that Lake X, you guys are 75%, you're doing great. So do we up your septic inspection program to a level 4, just to move it along a little bit more? Or this lake, you need a lot of work done. And maybe that lake, we start looking at, what do we do with lawns that are, shoreline or border to border are lawns? So maybe that lake you take on some more targeted information, public education to tell those people that this is what you need to do to get your lake back up in shape. Number one, I'd like to get rid of fertilizers. That would be a real simple low hanging fruit to get rid of right now. That's the kind of stuff that I think that this is a great opportunity as we move into lame duck collection, blah, 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 to really take a hard look at it and figure out, we have a wealth of information here. We've got it everywhere, and we just need to pull it together and see where the gaps are. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox.
And I think as far as the resolution goes, the proposal for a lake health program would capture all of that, right?
Yep. So having heard that, can I have a mover and a seconder, and we'll hear the resolution one more time? Councillor Roberts and Councillor DeVolen.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor DeVolen. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council direct staff to continue refinement of the draft shoreline preservation bylaw. That staff be directed to engage a solicitor to review the draft shoreline preservation bylaw as amended. That staff be directed to recruit a monitoring and enforcement team with job descriptions to be approved by County Council. That staff be directed to undertake a proposal for a lake health program, which would include the following. We would work with organizations to confirm and update the percentage of shoreline that remains in a natural and or regenerative state, establish recommended targets for naturalization and planning, review upper and lower tier bylaws and planning documents, and identify those that require amendments, and develop public information that could be shared now and if and when a bylaw is adopted.
I see a shaking head, and so I would go to Councillor Moffat.
I thought I heard the word recruit at the front end of that.
Yeah, I mean, but it's a chicken and egg thing. I think we would never recruit unless council had approved the job description or job descriptions. But this gives us authority once that's done to move forward. But I can take that out. It's not really relevant. I seem to hear a conversation that you wanted a staff person hired as soon as possible. So this would let us sort of proceed with that once you've approved a job description.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Councillor Moffat?
Yeah, I'm getting stuck on the specification of natural or regenerative, and I just wonder if it should say work with agencies and organizations that possess relevant data, because it's not just about a shoreline assessment. It's about more things. Maybe that's semantics, but I mean, we can nickel and dime this to death. I think we need to keep moving. Meantime, someone was having armor stone installed on their front yard this week. Like there's still bad stuff happening out there as we speak. So we need to not to lose sight of the conversation is about a bylaw, what we're going to do with it. We're slightly changing track in the same direction to keep going, but we need to not lose track of the bylaw itself. And I realize that it's being folded in. But I just don't want us to get hung up on, again, the semantics of one aspect when there may be others, to Councillor Kennedy's point.
I'd look for council's direction.
Councillor Roberts.
As the mover, I'm happy with the resolution as read by Mike. I know it's got a lot in there, but I felt very comfortable, even though the word recruit, he clearly stated that the job description will come back, because we sort of said, like, we want to invent this perfect person, and it might be a little challenging. And Steve has not, he needs time to process all this, because this has just come up today. So I'm happy. I will continue to move the resolution as on the table.
And a seconder? Okay. All in favor? Okay, one more comment, Councillor Royale. Did you want to make a comment or were you voting? All in favor? Thank you. I think this was a really good discussion. Just one more point with respect to this. The issue of septic inspection programs was raised, and I wanted to comment on that. I would really like to see, maybe as part of our service delivery discussions, that we put a little bit more emphasis and thought into streamlining those septic inspection programs. We're all doing slightly different things, and that causes confusion. And it also, when you look at something like this, I think it's problematic that we really do need to think about that and move towards streamlining it and making it the same across the board. Having said that, that's just a comment on my behalf. It is now 5 after 12, not 12 after 5. Although it feels like it could be 12 after 5. Does council want a break for lunch? We do have 2 or 3 more planning issues and a couple of administrative issues. Do you want to push through? It would maybe take as much as a half an hour, or do you want to break for lunch? Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, there aren't very many things left, and they're not that big. I'd be happy to just push through and finish up.
Okay, shall we? Mr. Councillor Burton?
Yeah, I would certainly agree. Let's see if we can wrap it up.
Well, the next item on the list is a planning department update. Take it away, Mr. Stone. It's your day today.
Thank you, Warden, to the rest of the council. So this is our standard update report. We just starting off, Land Division Committee did meet, and we dealt with some applications that were deferred. They were all approved. Moving forward, we have another meeting on the 9th, and it'll be a full agenda, upwards of 9 applications to be considered by the committee. You just are aware of the most significant application that we dealt with through the public meeting. And as I said, early this morning, we received additional comments from MTO. And I just got a word from the consultant that they're going to make some changes to the plan. So that's exciting. Based on, I guess it's based on the comments that were heard today. The GIS department has their Schedule A update on the projects they're working on. And probably the newest thing added for council's benefit is the floodplain mapping project. We did meet as a team, and in the minutes of those discussions are attached to Schedule B. Climate Change Office has a number of things that they highlighted as important for council's benefit. They're noted in the report. I think one of the more important things is the investments in new building technology that are coming forward. So council should take note of that. And also electric vehicles going forward are a big thing. There's certainly a big push by the federal government to see our vehicles switched over to being electrified by the end of 2030. So thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions.
Councillor DeVolen.
Just a cautionary tale in anything electrified. I've tried to buy both an electric vehicle and a hybrid in 12 to 18 months, and I'd say practically more like 2 years out. So I would think any decisions that are made, the reality on the ground is probably not going to happen for years to come.
Any other questions on the planning department update? Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive that report? Councillors Kennedy and Ryle.
Moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received the April 27th, 2022 staff report entitled Planning Department Update for information.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is the more homes for everyone. And your comment.
Thank you, Warden, members of council. This, as you may know, legislative change has very fast paced with the provincial government, and their latest initiative was the More Homes for Everyone Act. And it's basically hit the ground running last month, and they've been dealing with it, and hopefully it'll be approved very shortly. What they're trying to do is really take the red tape out of planning approvals so that they can get more housing on the ground sooner. Some of the bigger things, certainly for municipalities, is the notion of refunds to planning applications if they're not processed in a timely fashion. So there may be some challenges for the local municipalities, and including the county when it comes to plans of subdivision, condominium, for example. The other thing too that's embedded in this legislation is delegation of approval authority from council down to the planning departments. So that's coming rather soon. There need to be updates to, for example, our site plan control bylaws that require that delegated authority to be given to staff because it's being set up to be implemented early in the summer. So like I said, we didn't have the rural planning directors did look at this legislation, and the reality is we only had a couple of weeks to sort of coalesce our thoughts on that. And to the credit of our group, we do have some policy managers that got into the wording of the legislation, and then it appears in the staff report. There certainly are a number of attachments that council can review as well. So thank you.
Councillor DeVolen.
In some senses, I'm happy to see initiatives like this, but then there's the reality of what goes on. And I think in Minden Hills, the most substantial housing initiative that's presently on the books and what's dragging it out has nothing to do with county and municipal rules and bylaws and how fast staff execute things. It's been buried with MTO for a couple of years. And I would say if they clean their own house up in this regard and put some specific timelines on which they have to give approval or feedback, like we are when building permits, how many days they have to be returned by, how many days from when there's notice for an inspection, whatever. The MTO in my mind needs those, I'll be polite, darn rules applied to the standards that they have that are the biggest impediments that I've had in the years that I've been at council.
Other comments or questions on that report? Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Councillors Moffat and DeVolen.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor DeVolen, be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received the April 27th, 2022 staff report entitled Proposed Provincial Legislative Changes, More Homes for Everyone, 2022 for information.
All in favor? That's carried. And finally, the request for extension of draft approval for the Bark Lake development. Councillor Ryle, did you have a question? Go ahead, Mr. Stone.
Okay, thank you, Warden, members of council. So again, the request was received by the proponent for this plan of subdivision, and it had a fulsome review about 3 or 4 years ago. It's reflected in the new draft plan conditions. What they were asking for is a 2-year extension, which is routinely dealt with by council. So thank you.
Thank you. Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive that report and an approval? Councillors Burton and Ryle.
Moved by Councillor Burton, seconded by Councillor Ryle, be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received the April 27th, 2022 staff report entitled Request for Extension of Draft Approval of a Plan of Subdivision, file number 46-T-10001, Bark Lake for information. The County of Haliburton council modifies the conditions of draft approval of Plan of Subdivision file number 46-T-10001, and that approval of the draft plan of subdivision submitted by Century Lane Developments Corporation for part of lots 11 and 12 and all of lots 13 and 14 concession 10, all of lots 14 and 15 concession 11, geographic township of Glamorgan, municipality of Highlands East, be amended to extend the lapsing of draft approval for 2 years to April 29th, 2024, subject to the council of the township of Highlands East resolving to support the extension request.
All in favor? That's carried. Okay, back to where we left off on the agenda, is a brief discussion about returning to in-person meetings. And I'm gathering, I'm just assuming that that's just a reaffirmation that we all want to meet in person in May, or is there more to your discussion?
Well, only after council made the decision, Dr. Blocking sent out a recommendation, and I think we've all probably reviewed it. It strongly recommends masking. I think the conversation that council had in the past is if masking is mandatory, then we'll continue to meet virtually. From an administrative standpoint here, we have not mandated masking. We are strongly recommending it, but we have not mandated it. So in light of that, we just wanted to put this on the agenda and see if council were still of the same mind that you wanted to meet in person.
Council's thoughts. Councilor Roberts, then Moffat.
So, it is at the discretion. Well, we try to do things by consensus, but generally discretion of the chair. So actually, yesterday at Dysert's council meeting, I postponed our in-person meeting. It's supposed to be May 10th for our committee of the whole to the end of May. And all of council was quite comfortable with that. So I'm just putting that out there. It's just a couple weeks. COVID is absolutely everywhere. If you don't know 5 people that have it, then we're doing the business of council. I would be very happy to wait to the end of May.
I personally am not interested in wearing a mask at a meeting. I think we can see each other and get a sense of what our approach is much better without a mask. Even though Apple can now recognize our faces with a mask, we can't. Councillor Rail, and I'm sorry, and then
I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem going to in person, and I don't have a problem if we're sitting at the table and we're not masked. What concerns me and the contamination rate is huge. It's like I've got 2 neighbors right now that are in quarantine right here next door in Goodrum, and their whole families are basically in trouble. So if we can figure out how to get in and out of the building protected, then I would have no problem sitting at the table. I mean, I'm sure we're still going to be distanced. At least I hope we are, and do that. But the numbers are not good, and I got to be honest, I'm still concerned.
The council chambers has been reconfigured to some extent. It does expand the distance. There's 1 person at a table rather than 2, as we used to be. The screens have been moved. It's a little bit different. It's safer. But I'd love to hear from the rest of members of council. If you want to postpone meeting in person until the end of May, or Councillor Burton.
Thank you. And I would have no problem if we were to hold off till the end of May. I have absolutely no problem with doing that.
Okay. Councillor Moffat, my apologies.
That's okay. I'm kind of, I can go either way. We just can't, we can't fail to acknowledge that we can meet virtually, but then say hello to each other at the Huskies game or in the grocery store or at Costco or but I'm happy to walk across the driveway with a coffee in my hand, and I'm happy to go back to meetings. I just want to be careful that we make the decision for the right reasons, not because it's just easier to stay home. That's all.
Other thoughts? Councillor Schell.
no surprise, I'm ready to return anytime. However,
Just want those cinnamon buns.
that's exactly right. But with respecting other members of council who, you know, if you want to put off till the end of May, I mean, I'm not going to die on the hill, but I'm fully prepared to return. I think that, you know, where the whole world has moved back into, you know, there's graduations happening at the schools and things are happening. I'm not sure that, you know, us not meeting next week or in 2 weeks' time is going to stop the spread of COVID within the county as it's been. So anyhow, I will do what the majority would like, but I'm fully prepared.
I'd like to hear from Pat and Brent.
I'm ready to go back to the table, but if council wishes the other way, that's fine too.
Brent.
On the fence.
I've been ready for a long time, but I'll in the spirit of consensus, I'll defer that we will meet a month hence in person.
You know, I'm just thinking about the fact that I know that people are going back to in-person meetings, but there's also a certain amount of angst associated with that, and there are some people who are not comfortable. I'm inclined to say let's wait until the meeting at the end of May before we get back in person. I mean, everybody's sort of like, I'm fine if we do and I'm fine if we don't, and so you know, I just think that, as Andrea said, COVID is pretty prolific. It's a different breed of COVID that we're looking at now, but it's still there's an awful lot of people that are getting sick still. So if everybody's good with that, and we will reaffirm our decision to continue meeting at, you know, at that time. That sound all right? Okay, we're into reports from external boards and agencies. Anything specific that you'd like to bring to us on the health unit? Councillor Roberts.
Yes, COVID is in its 6th wave. No, I'm sorry, we were just talking about in-person meetings, and thank you for that. So I don't see anything unless someone wants to ask me a question on the minutes per se, but it always ends up the way the calendar goes. We've had our Board of Health meeting on April 21st, which was supposed to be in person and was changed to virtual in light of that. There is a risk of reinfection. A lot of people think, well, I've had it, I'm not going to get it again, and that's not true. Especially with Omicron and especially with the broader health restrictions across the province being lifted. And so people are contracting it more than once, just to say that. Also, one of the ways we can mitigate that is to continue the vaccinations. And I asked her about getting a booster because a lot of people say, well, I've had it, so isn't that my booster? Do I need a booster? Yes, they're still recommending a booster, but if you have contracted COVID, they're recommending 3 months from the time that you'll have had COVID until you get your booster. I'm just trying to look. When will it end? This is it from Dr. Bakke. Not likely for a long time. So they need to prepare now. Not only they're looking at this being, you know, year over year and continuing. So they're talking about that it will be ongoing for several years to come. We also had a presentation from a tobacco enforcement officer, his name is Robert Hewitt, which was really disturbing, and the number of youth that are vaping. He's calling it an epidemic. Approximately 15% of youth vape. And so it is still under their tobacco enforcement job description to manage. In all of 2021, there was 6 complaints. And to date, for 2022, there had already been 4 complaints. So that is a huge significance. And they do go to school to do presentations, but that sort of just raised my little flag of something that's happening with the youth in our community, and probably with adults too. But adults, when you're over 18, you can do whatever you want. So
when you say complaints about vaping, you mean on places like school property or
selling vaping products to underage on school property, those type of things.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, that's all I have to report.
Any questions for Councillor Roberts? Anything on point in time, Councillor Shell?
Yeah, we actually met last night, and again, it was a lot of policies and procedures reviews that we're doing right now. But one of the takeaways I did get from the meeting, which I found interesting, was that they did, there was 656 youth reached in the past year, opposed to or compared to the 137 the year before. So that's a good sign that, COVID restrictions have lifted enough that we are once again reaching the youth within the community. And Point in Time continues to work alongside the high school principal to try to streamline access for students within the school, because that's been a bit of a struggle. So those were the biggest takeaways that I got from the meeting.
Thank you. The Eastern, nothing to really report on Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus. We will be having a meeting in the County of Renfrew on the 13th of May. So I will bring back information from that after we've done that. Councillor DeVolen, anything on joint housing, social and housing?
They meet quarterly and we have not met.
Okay, we looked at signage for professional recruitment. Anything else on professional recruitment, Councillor Moffat?
No, nothing.
Anything that you would like to bring to our attention on the library board, Councillor Roberts? You're on mute.
Just saw that. Not necessarily in the minutes, but if I could, from our last, oh yes, it is in the minutes, sorry, because it's from the April 13th meeting. We adopted 14 hours equivalent of sick days for part-time employees. And I guess there was quite a little uptick on Twitter and that type of thing through libraries. It's not a common practice. And I really am proud of the library board for passing that. The majority of our employees are part-time, and it shows that we are a good employer. And we had quite a discussion with the library board on that. So I think it's a great thing to let our employees know that we've got their back. If they got a cold, stay home. So what else? Oh, we had a presentation from Andrea Brown, who's doing the programming, and boy, that was really refreshing. We're going to try to do that more at our library board meetings and have presentations from staff to really understand the day-to-day, what they do. And so she was just a ball of energy. She's got all kinds of stuff going on. And regarding our courier program, we are going to just be laying the groundwork, just doing some preliminary work on the possibility that the library would own its own vehicle to not only provide the courier service, but using it for other things like programming, even just moving things simple like furniture from one location to another. So it would be, no decision has been made on that, but the library board is contemplating that. That's it.
Thank you for that. Any questions about library activities? Could I have a mover and a seconder then to receive the reports and minutes from external boards and agencies? Councillors Roberts and Moffat.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the following: the March 17th, 2022 approved minutes from the Haliburton 4th Pine Ridge District Health Unit Board of Health meeting, and the draft minutes from the March 16th, 2022 and the April 13th, 2022 meetings of the Haliburton County Public Library Board.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is the Land Division Activity Report. I guess we would bring in Mr. Stone.
Yes.
Welcome back.
Yes, thank you. Warden and members of council. You can hear me all right?
Yes.
So just not too much happening at the last committee, just approval of some deferred right of way. So that's a short night for the committee. So thank you.
To prepare us for the next long night. Okay, if there are no questions, could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the land division report? Councillors Kennedy and DeBolen.
Moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by Councillor DeBolen. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received the April 27th, 2022 report entitled Land Division Activity Report for Information.
All in favor? That's carried. Councillor Burton, what have you to tell us about Good Roads in your most recent conference?
Thank you, Warden. Just a small update that we did have our conference. It was very, very successful. The numbers were huge for us. We managed to keep people safe, and that was my goal when we decided we were going to have in-person conference. And to date, I've had no reports back of any cases or any problems at all. During the conference, it was interesting for me. I got the opportunity to introduce Minister Monty McNaughton. He's the Minister of Labor, Tourism, and Training and Skills Development, and he did have a special announcement for our conference, and he did report that they have $1.3 million that they have invested into Good Roads for our skill training and school development. And I was really excited about that. The interesting thing when I thanked Minister McNaughton about it was that funding, that money will certainly funnel down and affect every municipality in Ontario, all 444 of them. And he didn't look at it that way, but it certainly will. But on most part, we did have a very, very successful conference, and I sincerely hope that AIM can do the same thing when it comes their turn.
As do we all. Thank you. Councillor DeVolen, anything that you wish to impart from EORN's perspective?
Well, yes and no. There's been some seismic shifts in progress that has effects on this multi-year program. At this point, I'm not at liberty to say them, so I can tell you with what's happened in the last week, on one thing I'm jumping up and down on the inside. There's another one probably going to happen in the next week or two. And EORN is going to come to us, I believe, in the month of June, correct, Mike?
Yes.
And not only these two things that have me jumping up and down, I think to be in a position to talk more about the project and specifically the parts that are relative to Haliburton County. Would that be fair to say, Mike?
Yeah, I think to the extent they can, yes.
Well, we look forward to that. And it's nice to know that there's things that are concerning you or making you jump up and down, but one of these days you're just going to have to tell us what they are. I hear you. It's okay. Councillor Kennedy.
Yeah, thanks for that. I look forward to that, Councillor DeVolen. We're starting to hear the natives are drumming on the drums again about what's going on with this program. And as more and more cottagers start to come back to their cottages, it's only going to increase in volume. Is there any possibility that, excuse me, that EORN could put out some kind of a status report currently that you can speak to, publicly, that could be available for us to disseminate out?
Well, I think Mike and I both can take it back to the board. They do in the EORN sites, but maybe, Mike, we can work on something that gets delivered to us through county that we can plug into those avenues with the cottage associations or off our website that we can use to leverage that. Would that be reasonable, Madam Warden and CAO Mike?
Yeah, I actually requested an update like that yesterday. And just so that, because I indicated that, cottage association meetings are coming up, and I know that will be a topic of conversation. All of the communication needs to be approved by Rogers, and so there's a bit of a delay, but they did commit to get that to us, and hopefully there will be some good information at the June update as well. So it's been a bit of a challenge because everything does have to be approved through Rogers before it's communicated out, but I think you'll see, hopefully we'll get some information in the very near future, and then some more in June.
And I'm going to additionally add to that, the duty to consult is a brand new element to anything and any project that goes on that has broad implications like this. I'm impressed. I mean, I can't get the smile off my face on how that's doing. But these things with multiple levels of government, duty to consult the company with Rogers, there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that have to be all set and done and agreed to before we're given the muzzle that we're under to do it. And trust me, it's the minute we can say these things, we'll say those things. And do I understand from somebody on the outside looking in? Like, we just like to know, right? But anyway, we're getting there. There's some big pieces that have moved going forward, and like I say, by June it would be wonderful. But certainly, I'm confident in this year, those questions that people have from specific cottage association, whatever, I think we're going to be able to speak to them far more freely than we have been today.
Oh, that's good news. Councillor Kennedy.
Yeah, I want to make an apology to council. I made an inappropriate comment during my talk about this topic. And so I'd like to apologize to anybody that may have offended with my comments. I won't go into it at this time, but I can talk to you offline if you like. But I just want to, I apologize for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything on poverty reduction roundtable?
Oh, we have not met since the last time we've met, so no.
Okay. Next on the agenda is the calendar. Are there any errors or omissions that have been noted on the calendar? Councillor Roberts.
I'm sorry, but I had a chuckle that we have Memorial Day on there, which is a United States holiday and not Victoria Day, but it's got nothing to do with county council. I just don't know what calendar they're using.
Okay, well, we'll accept our schedule as presented. Okay, that concludes the open portion of our meeting. And could I have a mover and a seconder to move into closed? For a brief discussion, Councillors Moffat and Ryle.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council enter into closed session for the following reasons: personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees.
All in favor? That's carried.
And we're back live, Warden Danielson.
Thank you. Welcome back to the open session. Could I have a mover and a seconder for bylaw number 4106, that being the rehabilitation of the lower Cup Lake culvert? Councillors Moffat and DeVolen.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor DeVolen. Be it resolved that bylaw 4106, being a bylaw to authorize an agreement with Premier North Limited for the rehabilitation of the lower Cup Lake culvert, be considered to be read as first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. Is there any notice of motions? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder for the confirming bylaw? Councillor Roberts and Councillor Burton.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Burton. Be it resolved that bylaw 4107, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the April 27th, 2022 meeting of Haliburton County Council, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. And could I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn? Councillors Kennedy and Ryle.
Moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that the April 27th, 2022 meeting of Haliburton County Council be adjourned.
All in favor? That's carried. Thanks, everyone. That was a productive meeting. I think it went well, and we got through a couple of pretty big subjects. So well done. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Take care, everyone.